Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Deku had met Itsuka Kendo Part 1. If you guys enjoy this what if and want to see Part 2, comment down below and let me know before I start. Please do support for more awesome content. And leave a like and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and also share this video with your friends and check out the description in my playlist. The author of the story Yojimbra from AO3. So let's start the video. Hiya. The dojo had a distinctive scent to it that no matter how many times the hard wooden floor was cleaned hung in the air welcoming all that entered. It was the scent of sweat, of hard work, of dedication, with a healthy dose of incense all bound together through years of training and practice. Hey yo. She turned. The slow movement as they changed from stretch to stretch was reflected by her fellow disciples. Some rushed ahead of her, others lagged behind, and a few got the positions wrong. A mirror ran along the far wall of the dojo. One of her earliest memories of this dojo was about that mirror. Her father warning her not to lick it when they had first arrived. That was 8 years ago. While the students changed like the seasons, the biggest change was her father's mustache, though there was still a bit of pepper hidden among his gray hairs. Her father was a tall, slender man that looked more at home in his white training gi than he did in a t-shirt. For as long as she could remember, he had served as her father and her sensei, even if he only let her into the adult class just last year. Hiya. Once more they all shifted. Their legs pressed straight against the ground while they tried to touch their toes. It was a standard stretch, one that was even done at school, but still a good stretch. At least that's what her father told her. Outside of knowing that stretching was good for her, she didn't know much more outside of that. The door opened, allowing the invasive sounds of the nearby road to puncture their tranquility. Lifting her head up just the slightest amount, she looked towards the entrance. A plump green-haired woman was shuffling her feet to take off her shoes while a green-haired boy did the same. A bandage was stuck to the boy's cheek, covering several of his freckles, and another was wrapped around his right hand. Somehow he managed to look twice as nervous as any newcomer that came before him. With his slender stature and the way his posture was slouched, he looked like a nerd. It was probably some concerned mother trying to toughen up their son to give them more confidence. There wasn't anything wrong with that, but few of those students lasted. Fewer still stuck with her father's class. Itsuka, lead for a moment. Stretches, crab walks, sweeps, her father said, holding out a simple hand gesture, his smile large enough that it nearly forced his eyes closed. That limp she had known all her life was present in the first few steps before his posture corrected itself. Hiya, she shouted, directing the group into the next set of stretches. Hello, and welcome to my dojo. Her father gave the standard greeting. Always eager to take on new students, it was a shame he was just as enthusiastic as sending them to what he thought were better teachers. Why yes, hi, the woman squeaked. Apparently, she was just as nervous as her son. My name is Inko Midoriya. I spoke on the phone with a kendo sensei. Ah yes, Mrs. Midoriya, it's a pleasure to meet you, her father said, no doubt giving a small bow to the pair. And this must be the young man with a heroic soul, Izuku. You're the boy squeaked. Maybe he learned his nervousness from his mother. Kyo, she shouted, forcing the group to the turn again. Your 𝗧𝗵𝗃 Kendo the hurricane striker, Izuku blurted out. Your quirk allows you to extend your legs. You use this in combination with your martial arts skills to catch villains off guard. Oh, I didn't realize there were any fans still interested in a retired pro like me. Her father's laugh drew the attention of everyone. A sharp glare and a quick clap got everyone back on track. Though don't think I'll go easy on you just because you buttered me up. Now please, follow me, we can talk in my office. The office wasn't so much an office as much as it was just a room to the side that allowed him some privacy while still allowing him to see the dojo floor. There was no door, no desk, just 2 benches and a small table. Huh, she shouted, turning to face the rest of the disciples, clapping her hand as they all stood. All right, we're doing crab walks, get against the wall. 40 should he ask him for his autograph? Did he even bring the correct notebook that had his quirk profile? That one was in his 10th notebook, right? It should still be on his desk. Would that be weird? It was his 4th time meeting a hero that he had taken notes on, and this was the longest one so far. Wait, wasn't he going to be his sensei? Would that be awkward? My, you sure do mumble a lot, don't you? Hurricane Striker gave a small laugh, stroking at his well-kept beard that was a mix of black and white hairs a bit like pepper. His long black hair was smooth and pulled back into a small ponytail. He looked older than he did in the pictures, but just as frightening. Sorry, he sucked on his lip trying to sink down into the bench. Mr. Hurricane Striker Sensei, sir. It's fine, my boy, but before you can call me Sensei, I do have a few questions I'd like to ask you. The retired pro hero leaned forward, placing his elbows on his knees, his smile fading so that his pale blue eyes were visible. It was amazing how much a simple smile can change a man. Yes, sir. He shot back into his seat. There was a wave of terror radiating from this man that went well beyond his status as a pro hero. His mother likewise did the same. Place a hand over his chest like they were riding a train and it was coming to a sudden stop. This might have been a mistake. Your mother, he gestured towards his mother. She looked halfway to passing out. called me yesterday, asking if there was anything I could do to help you. She says that you have a habit of trying to help people, even when it would put your life in danger, and she's worried about you. I know, he knew better than anybody that he wouldn't be able to do anything, that he couldn't stop them, but that boy was in trouble, and he thought they might listen to him. Instead, they both got beat up. I'd certainly hope so. 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧 gaze continued to bore into him. It was hard to look him in the eyes, but harder not to. It felt like he was looking both into him and past him. But I didn't ask if you know. What I want to know is, why did you do it? He swallowed, finding the words stuck to the back of his throat like frozen grapes, cold, hard, and vaguely sour. The principal had asked him this too. He didn't really know then either. He still didn't know why he didn't get suspended, or why the bullies confessed, but the burn marks on their clothes looked similar to 𝐭𝐻𝐿's quirk. I don't know, he said weakly, offering up a small shrug while twiddling his thumbs. He spared a look to his mother, who was looking at him with just as much worry as before. He hated making her worry. He needed my help. And what else? What else was there? There wasn't. He just saw someone in trouble and the rest was history. I don't know, my body just moved on its own. A low hum came from across the table, closer to the rumbling of a landslide than the deep chuckle that it was. A spark ignited in 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧's pale blue eyes, and he could once again see a smile pulling at his cheeks. I see. Tell me, young Izuku, do you wish to become a hero? Yes, he blurted out, hands shooting down to the rough wooden bench he was sitting on. That bravado was as short-lived as a bottle rocket, fading before he even knew it was really there. Just that one flash remained. I mean, I do, but I don't have a quirk, so I don't know if I can. I did not ask if you could. He placed his hand down on the small wooden table that separated them. His hands were rough, full of calluses, with strong, well-defined muscles trailing up into his white sleeve. I asked for your desire. Now, place your hand in mine, face up. He did as asked. The moment his hand touched 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗧's, the man reached across the table, sliding his own sleeve up to the elbow, exposing his thin arms and non-existent muscle. You have the heart and soul of a hero, Izuku, but you do not have the body or mind of one. Truly, you are a divided individual. Kotsu dragged a finger along the creases in his palm, touching each of his fingers before sliding up his arm. You are as weak as you are unsure of yourself. Unfortunately, the last time will not be a last time. You will act again even when your mind and body are screaming at you to stop. Your heart and soul will push you forward until you reach that last time. I'm not fool enough to believe that martial arts alone will allow you to stand up to those with devastating quirks. The strength I can teach you will not allow you to save people. It will simply allow you to survive when your heart and soul drive you once again. His smile vanished, and his eyes turned into hooks, pulling at his very being to shake loose any truths that he himself did not know. Will that be enough? A sharp pain and the warm irony taste of blood poured into his mouth. Had he been biting his lip that hard? His heart was pounding in his chest. Someone was giving him a chance. Someone was saying that he could do something, even without a quirk, even if it was small. But he couldn't lie to him. Not now. His heart spoke first. No. A roar of laughter that was closer to that of a crazed war cry erupted from Kotsu, one hand slapping his knee, while the other enclosed around his hand. That's the answer. That is the answer. Very well, young Midoriya. From this day forth you shall be one of my disciples. You won't let me down, will you? And no, sir. Something surged through him, growing with each passing moment. A new desire that flowed into his dreams of becoming a hero. A small flame that was the hope of success. A dream within a dream. The ambition of ambition. He wanted to study martial arts, and he wanted to be good at it. I won't. I know you won't. Kotsu grabbed his hand, forcing it into a fist before placing both hands onto the table. But I'm going to make you wish you did. That didn't sound ominous at all. Now then, I will talk to your mother, Payment, as well as address any concerns she might have. Kotsu, it was probably Kendo-sensei, clapped his hands twice and paused. Nothing happened. He looked to his side and clapped again. Hello, glorious first pupil of mine. He leaned out of the room. Itsuka, that's you, get over here. A girl, about his age, with long orange hair tied into a ponytail that ended just below her shoulder, walked into view. She was taller than him, with teal green eyes and a half-annoyed, half-polite look on her face. She wore a white training outfit just like Kendo-sensei did, though her belt was a different color. Yes, sensei. Kendo-sensei pulled her in by the waist, giving her a quick hug and smiling wide enough to show off all his teeth, much to the girl's embarrassment. This is my prized pupil and daughter, Itsuka. Today, she will be getting you your equipment, taking some measurements, and leading you through stretches. But Dad, Itsuka began to whine. It's sensei right now. Now, listen to your sensei. One of the most important lessons to learn is how to teach others, because that will lead you to teaching yourself. It's a very important milestone in your growth. And how do I know you're not just being lazy? But that is another lesson to learn. Now please, take young Izuku for a moment. You two are the same age, so I hope you become friends as student and master. The girl smiled at the last word. He was starting to get the feeling that Kendo-sensei was a master at motivating people. Before he could so much as say hello, Itsuka reached over and grabbed him by the wrist, pulling him up and out of the room with ease. She was a lot stronger than she looked. "Come on, Izuku, let's get going." A girl was touching him, and she was going to be talking to him. What was he supposed to do? He never talked to a girl before. Did this counter? He was talking to a girl, despite the fact that he hadn't even said anything yet. 40, she had a pupil, a disciple. Wait, did that make her a master? Was this her father's unofficial way of saying that she was a master now? No, that wasn't it. This was a test. A test to see if she could handle her own class. If she had her own class, she'd be a paid, which meant she'd be able to start saving up for her own motorcycle once she turned 60. This was going to be so great. And thankfully she wasn't being forced to teach a little kid. Just a red-faced, scrawny, nervous-looking featherweight that had 2 left feet. No big deal. That was one of the first things they tried to correct. Balance and control over their own body. There were a lot of people that weren't aware of their own muscles. She pulled him past the dojo, into the back room that was a mix of storage, locker, break, nurse's office, and weight room with curtain-changing rooms. Her father's massage and acupuncture table sat in the middle, with a pile neatly stacked mats underneath it. Practice weapons, namely staffs, both padded in pure wood, were stacked in a corner near a variety of punching dummies. It had been a while since they had used them, even in the child class where the uncoordinated children loved to flail at them or hug them. It was 50 over 50 with most kids. Releasing her new disciple next to the scales and height measuring equipment, she looked around the room looking for the charts her father kept. He stood where she left him. His mouth was moving and he was making noises, but they weren't words. When she looked back at him, he stood straight, mouth shut. Hopefully he wouldn't be too nervous to speak. "So, how old are you?" she asked, opening a drawer, finding what she was looking for, a clipboard and a stack of forms that her father filled out for their students. "Oh, and what school do you go to?" 14. He squeaked, and bowing at his waist, hands at his sides. He shot back up a second later. "I go to 𝐒𝐪𝐼 Junior High." "Oh, I think I went there once with the martial arts club." She marked his age on the charge, smiling in hopes to put him at ease. It didn't work. He bowed again. "I'm from 𝗵𝗏𝗻 Junior. It's nice to meet you, Izuku." "Likewise." He bowed again. "Kendo-sensei." She laughed, nudging him closer to the measuring device on the wall. He was a bit shorter than her, but that was true for a lot of boys her age. But she was probably done growing at her 166 centimeters. The boys still had a few years to catch up and pass her. "You'll be calling my father that a lot, so why don't you just call me Itsuka? Besides, I don't think I'm your actual master." Her father was good at telling people what they wanted to hear, especially her. "Right, now stand straight. I need to get an accurate reading for your height." "Yes, sensei." She rolled her eyes and took his measurements. He was 157 centimeters, with a bit extra, and weighed a whopping 53 kilograms, which meant that he actually did weigh less than her. All right, now that that's taken care of, she tossed the largely unfilled chart to the side. Her father could do the rest if he really wanted it. Weight and height were really the only important ones for practicing. The only other thing that was important was, "Oh, wait, what's your quirk?" "My quirk," he stuttered, fidgeting with his fingers and shuffling his feet. His face was redder than most girls got when they talked about boys. "Yeah, we need to know if you need anything special done for your gi. Your quirk's part of your body, so part of training is learning your quirk too." She held out her hands, forcing them to grow. It was slow, but bit by bit they grew to be roughly the size of her own body. "I'm still working on how fast I can make them grow, and how big I can get them." Whoa, his face lit up. "Your quirk is amazing. If you can increase the speed of the growth fast enough, you can add the extra force to your punches. Or maybe not. They don't appear to be weighing you down. Does their weight not change?" "It does. My hands are also stronger. Watch." She placed a single finger underneath the massage table and pulled it upwards with great ease. "I can also carry a lot more stuff when they're like this too." She put the table down lightly and began to shake like she was drying them her hands to make them shrink. "Still takes a while to get them back to normal." "That's an amazing quirk you have. It's almost like your hands stay the same size but everything else shrinks." Izuku looked at her with wide-eyed intrigue. Only her father had called her quirk interesting before and had been going out of his way to figure out a way for her to use it in martial arts. "Thanks, but what about your quirk?" Izuku's excitement vanished, replaced with that nervousness once again. "Oh, I don't actually have a quirk." "Oh, that kind of explained a bit actually. At least she wouldn't have to go back and fill out that box." "Oh, well, okay then. I guess that you'll just need a regular gi then." Digging through the storage locker, she pulled one out and handed it to him. "Here, put this on, it should fit," she hummed, waiting for him to finish changing behind the curtain. He didn't have a quirk, huh? In a way that almost made him stand out more. It probably made him a target for bullies or teasing, which was probably why he was in here to begin with. Well, it was her job to make sure that he would be able to defend himself, even just a little bit. "How's it feel?" she asked. His response was a gasp, followed by some incoherent babbling. Hopefully, he got over his nervousness before it drove him to quit. It'd look bad if her first pupil quit on her. Fine, he squeaked. It's easy to move in. Good. That means it'll be easy for you to stretch in and then learn some real martial arts. She stood in front of the curtain, hands on her hips, smiling in his general direction. He needed to see that she was comfortable around him, and maybe that would make him more comfortable around her. Besides, despite what her classmates said, she was not a scary person. She could just kick their asses. Come on out, let me see. The curtain was opened so slowly that it was painful. Then Izuku stepped out. He was practically swimming in it. Still, it was better than nothing. All right, now you look the part of the pupil. She folded her hands in front of her and bowed towards him. He took a moment and mirrored her stance. From there she moved her hands in a circle, drawing herself upwards and into one of her favorite stances. One hand near her head, palm out, the other fully extended and ready to strike, while standing on one leg, the other drawn up so that her foot touched her knee. Are you ready to learn, Izuku? He tried to copy her. There was so much wrong with his stance, from the stiffness of his motions to the awkwardness of this resting angle, that it was easier to say the one thing that he did right. He tried. A moment after his foot left the ground, he fell forward, barely catching himself before landing on the ground. Don't worry, Izuku, you're still new. It's going to be a while before you feel comfortable going through the stances, but that's what we're going to teach you. But first, let's practice stretching. She kept her eyes locked onto his. Keeping her knees straight, she leaned forward, bending at the waist while pushing her hands down to her toes, then pressing her palm flat against the floor. She turned to look at him, a kind of amazed look on his face. All right, now you try to touch your toes. He leaned forward like a robot, his knees bending ever so slightly as his waist came to a right angle and stopped, his arms dangling without even touching his legs. He tried to push forward but lost his balance, taking a step forward before catching himself. Okay, maybe this was going to be a bit more work than she thought, he gasped, falling forward so that she had to catch him before he crashed to the floor. A lot more work. Second strike chapter text. You can make the first move. She wasn't being polite. Itsuka bowed to him once more, fist inside of her open palm, and smiling at him. When it came to skill, grace, and strength, she was really amazing, and somehow managed to defeat him without actually hurting him. It also felt like he learned more going against her than he did following the stances. Sweat glistened on her forehead and her breathing was heavy but measured. After a month of training and learning the basics, Kendo-sensei had decided that it was time for him to have some experience. Unfortunately, the only opponent in his weight class, and it wasn't by a small margin, was Itsuka, which was a bunch of different problems all tied into one. First, that she was a girl, and he could barely talk to her while looking her in the eyes. Second, he saw her take down the tallest man in their class. Fortunately, by the third, maybe the fourth time he had been, gently, flipped onto the mat. The whole her being a girl thing didn't really matter. He returned her bow. His breath came in short, rapid bursts. Everything about martial arts was still foreign to him, from breathing to where his feet belonged, to even how to properly do the moves. Nothing felt right, but it did feel better than last week. Hopefully, that meant he was making progress. He shifted his stance ever so slightly, seeking the position that wasn't the most comfortable or the most natural, but the one that was right, that perfect spot that Itsuka, Kendo-sensei, and all the others seemed to carry about with them. He didn't find it. Foot forward, arm up, palm open, fingers curled. He moved forward, his back foot sliding forward as he closed the space between him and Itsuka. She had a greater reach than him, in part due to her height, but the way she controlled her body. In theory, the flow of a fight was just like following a script, just one that he couldn't read, and one that Itsuka didn't need. If he struck her stomach, she'd block it and pull him into another toss, or press him down onto the mat again, ending the bout. If he attempted her chest, she'd deflect the blow, pushing him out and away before pushing him down onto the ground. There was only one option, a strike to the arm. Thud. Beway. The air was forced from his lungs as he stared up at the ceiling. Either it didn't hurt or it hurt so much that he couldn't feel it. A dull soreness, the briefest ghost at the back of his foot where Itsuka must have hit him. A hand appeared above him, and Itsuka's face blocked one of the few dull lights that gave off a natural illumination. Her orange ponytail bobbed close to her as she smiled at him. Sorry, Izuku. I didn't think you'd fall that fast when I tripped you. I think your center of gravity was off. With his limited knowledge of martial arts, or how he even ended up on the ground in the first place, that sounded like something he'd mess up with. He took her hand and he was pulled up more by her strength than his. Muscles that he had long neglected that were already burning from the previous training sessions were now on fire. They bowed once more, and despite his mild cause of severe exhaustion, and at least 2 heart attacks at touching a girl, again, he found himself smiling to the point that his cheeks hurt. Thank you for the match. Itsuka returned his smile. Likewise, you'll get the hang of it if you keep it up. Well done, Izuku. Kendo-sensei gave him a short clap, his eyes shrinking under the weight of his smile. There is something to be said about being able to smile at your opponent. especially when he tasted defeat 8 times in a row to the same foe and still stood up. Though, perhaps his perseverance is a bit too much. His face felt hot, and not just from the usual things like being tired, or being in the spotlight, or existence. Looking at the ground cooled his face just enough. A clap from Kendo-sensei drew his eyes back up. Now then, take a small break to recover. 40 Izuku was just as odd, skittish, and well, to be frank, weak as her first impression of him was. But he was not without surprises. He took to the concepts of moves and technique faster than most of their seniors. In many ways it was his body and inexperience that really held him back. That, and his constant habit of second-guessing his every action that made him move even slower. But the part of him that most people didn't see was that he simply didn't quit. It was just like her father said, he had more perseverance than just about anybody. Very few students could handle losing 8 times in a row and still get back up on their feet and smile at their opponent ready for more. She doubted even her father could do that. Turning her back to the wall, she slid down next to him, popping open her water bottle and taking a good long sip. He nearly jumped away from her. Right, she needed to remember that he was a bit like a cat and she needed to approach him slowly, or wait for him to get used to her. You know, I think you really impressed my 𝐬𝗲𝗧𝗏. I did. He half stuttered, looking to her for just a split second before staring at his water bottle. But you beat me every time. And that last time was so fast. I think he was testing you. He wanted to see if you'd give up. But you didn't, so he had to give up instead. I've seen him do it before as some kind of a test. Most people get fed up around 4 losses in a row before they're done. She punctuated the sentence by taking another sip of her water. And when I was going up against you, it felt like you were studying me and trying to find a weakness. You never did the same thing twice. Thanks, he said to his water bottle. I mean it. Did you watch a lot of fight videos or something? Maybe some action anime. Just videos about heroes and stuff. He nodded to where her father was talking to a few other students. It's how I knew about Kendo-sensei. Well, not about, but his quirk and stuff. You seemed pretty excited about my quirk too. Do you study them or something? She knew of weirder hobbies. Some people let their quirks dictate their personality, probably because of the nicknames associated with them. If only she could get them to stop calling her man hands. Izuku winced, looking at her again for that half second, a frown appearing on his face. I find quirks interesting. Mostly those used by heroes, and I try to figure what they can do and other things. Really? That's a cool hobby. Do you have notes? His face went red. He had notes. If you have some on my dad, you should let me see them. Oh, what about other pro heroes, like All Might or Ryukyu? She's still pretty new, but I think she's going to make it into the top 10 this year. Yes. Izuku turned to look at her, eyes wide and a smile on his face. She's been doing great since she started her own agency. And with the combination of her quirk Dragoon and her charity work, she's quickly becoming a favorite. Last week she stopped the hijacking of an armored car by picking it up and flying it to a police station. That was so cool. She half squealed. The event took place while she was in class, but she managed to watch the video during lunch. She and 𝗵𝗃 are my favorites, and part of the reason why I want to become a pro hero. The other being her parents. All Might is my favorite. Izuku beamed. I want to be able to save people with a smile on my face like he does. Well, to do that you're going to have to keep training hard, right? She bumped her water bottle against his, an incredibly lame and awkward toast to nothing. Maybe he was planning on becoming a police officer or a firefighter or something like a paramedic. Yeah. He stared at his water bottle again, staring at it intently as his hand shook slightly. That's why I want to go to 𝐸𝐸 was the school she wanted to go to. It was the school that everybody that wanted to be a hero wanted to go to. It was the top school for those that wanted to use their quirks or be a part of the hero world. To be a hero. He nodded, lip bitten into silence. But she should say this. It was the obvious truth. One that he knew all too well. One that he had to live with every single day of his life. You don't have a quirk. Too late. Izuku nodded again, thumbing at the cap of his water bottle. Yay, I know. A clap echoed through the building. Break time was over. She hopped to her feet, and he stood up slowly, looking more defeated now than he had when she put him on the ground 8 times in a row. Izuku, I'm sorry, she said as he stood next to her. I shouldn't have said that. It's fine. He didn't smile when he said that. Instead, he just rubbed the back of his head, looking away from her once more. It's just the truth. She could apologize to him better after class, once she figured out how to cheer him up. 40. Izuku. Kendo-sensei called to him when training was over. Many of the senior students were already on their way out the door, dressed in whatever clothes they came in with. But his sensei stood in front of the mirrors, gesturing towards a lone pair of mats that had been placed there. Have a seat. I'd like to speak to you for a moment. Every muscle in his body was sore again, and his stomach was already grumbling with hunger. He might have to stop and get something on his way home this time. Things were only made worse by the feeling in his stomach that this was not going to be a good conversation. Did I do something wrong, sensei? He kneeled down on the cushion, placing his hands over his knees. He sat like this a few times with his grandpa, but this was the first time where it actually scared him. Oh, no, quite the opposite. Kendo-sensei sat opposite him, back completely straight with the kind of posture that he'd only seen in old movies with samurai or yakuza. His sensei's smile was wide, pulling his eyes so tight that the blue of his iris was little but a spark. You have been in my class for about a month now, and I just want to know your thoughts. My thoughts? What were his thoughts? Did he like the class? He liked Sensei and Itsuka, and he wanted to keep going. But there was so much he didn't understand. It felt like he was moving slower, watching the others spar. They were so fast, so certain of themselves. I mean, in regards to you. Kendo-sensei made a simple gesture with his wrinkled and calloused hand that compared to his smooth underworked hands were like the bark of a tree. Are you enjoying yourself? I didn't push you too hard today, did I? That was a good question. He opened his mouth before he had his answer, and closed it soon after. I like it and all. But it's just he paused, grabbing his white pant legs and staring at the ground between them. He knew what was bothering him, but saying it was different. You don't have to be afraid, Izuku. You'd be doing both of us a disservice. It doesn't feel like I'm making progress. He kept his head down and to the side. I know that it takes time and that I've only been doing it for a month, but it feels like I'm so far behind that no matter what I do, I won't catch up. Kendo-sensei hummed into a small chuckle. That is because you are still a beginner, Izuku. Everybody begins somewhere. You can't expect to catch up in mere weeks. I don't, he muttered. I just give it time, Izuku. But hold on to that feeling and try to find a way for it to motivate you. Kendo-sensei placed a hand to his mustache, brushing the black and white hairs, and thought. I know, you're a fan of All Might, correct? How did he know? Did he see his All Might theme underwear? He didn't wear those to school anymore. Was it the keychain? Everybody had that keychain. Yes, don't look so shocked. Your mother told me. He reached behind his cushion, pulling out a thin leather book. That was dated for nearly 40 years ago. Some kind of yearbook, maybe. That's why I dug this out. Now, where was that page? Aha, here we are. He stopped near the middle, turning it around so that he could see it. It was a class photo, one of Yua with the same blue and white gym uniforms they still wore today. There were numerous people in and he recognized none of them. This is class 1 from when I was in my final year at Yua. Does anybody stand out among these future pro heroes? He shook his head, scanning for anybody. He brought up All Might, but none of these people looked like him. And this would be before All Might went to America. And photos before his return were rare. He'd only seen a few of him in America on the web. None from his time in Yua. And no, I don't, he admitted. Maybe Kendo-sensei turned to the wrong page. His sensei moved his finger without looking at the page towards a boy with long blonde hair and blue eyes. He was smiling at the camera as best he could. A bandage was wrapped around his head and his right arm was even in a sling. This, Kendo-sensei said, voice filled with pride and nostalgia. This is Toshinori Yagi, that's All Might. He grabbed the book, shoving his face into it and staring right at the young man. Yes, now that he was told, it was obvious. The blue eyes, the hair color, even the stance were all very All Might, with the sole exception being his injuries. All Might was all but invincible. Nothing could hurt him. Shocking, I know. Kendo-sensei placed both hands on his knees, a smile taking over his face once more. But All Might wasn't always almighty. Despite his great strength, he had absolutely no coordination and his fighting instincts were far below average, even going so far as to not even make it to the first round of the sports festival. I believe he scored so low on both practical exams that he was nearly kicked out of Yua. No way. This was first-hand rare Might facts, one that nobody would ever believe. Was he shaking? He might be shaking. He was shaking. My point is, Izuku, even somebody like All Might had to start from somewhere. Kendo-sensei tapped the yearbook, drawing his attention upwards. You have the discipline, Izuku. All you need is to find the motivation for that to matter. He rose to his feet, smiling. You can borrow that if it interests you so much. Your mother did say you were All Might's biggest fan after all. I'll be sure to give it back as soon as possible, Sensei. He stood, nearly slipping as the cushion moved under his feet. The fan boards were going to freak out about this. He needed to get home and scan this as soon as possible. Thank you, Sensei. He sprinted towards the door. He had a spare set of school clothes he could wear, but first things first, he needed to take care of this. Wait, what if there was more than one All Might picture in here? He might as well have a national treasure on his hands. Whoa, he nearly ran into Itsuka as he hurried to put his shoes on. Everything okay, Izuku? Yay, he said, sparing her a glance. She was out of her usual training uniform. Instead, she was wearing a simple t-shirt with shorts. He plopped one shoe on and smiled at her, getting the other one half on as he made his way towards the door. I just need to get home as soon as possible. Nothing bad. I'll see you tomorrow for more practice. He was out the door and sprinting down the staircase. Hey, he heard her call from behind him. Wait, we don't meet up tomorrow. 40, damn it. There went her chance to apologize. and waiting to do so will just make things awkward. Chasing after him would just be weird, but he didn't seem too upset. If anything, he looked really excited, so maybe he forgot about it. She groaned, scratching the sides of her head and pulling at her ponytail. If she didn't apologize to him, it was going to eat her alive until she did. Why did she have to speak her mind? She let out a sigh that turned into a raspberry. She'd just have to wait. Her father came in from behind her, placing a pair of cushions back into their storage place. "What did you tell Izuku?" she asked, spinning on her heel and shouldering her book bag. If she did have homework, she'd leave it down here. But school was demanding more and more of her time. He seemed excited. Motivation is an important tool of a sensei. Her father hummed, locking the entrance. He walked over to her and placed his hands on her shoulder, pushing her towards the mirror. "Motivating you is simple. You simply hate losing, so you'll try harder and harder until you win. Well, 𝐒𝐩𝐢. In that way, you are so much like your mother, and you look more like her with every passing day," her father said, freezing the words in her mouth. He rubbed her shoulders, his smile firm, but it did not hide the sadness in her father's eyes. "I'm certain that she would have been proud of the woman you are growing into." "I know I am. That's not fair." She ignored the water droplet that had somehow appeared out of her eye and turned to smack her father in his chest. Her father scuffed, holding his chest like he had suffered a severe wound. "What? Saying that I'm proud of you? It's your own fault for being such a good daughter. No, using mom like that to motivate me." She was already giving it her all. He smiled, a soft smile that let his blue eyes still shine through. "I simply reminded you, nothing more, nothing less." He turned towards the back door and towards the staircase that led up to their home. "Now, let's get dinner started. I'm feeling a teriyaki bowl." Third bout chapter text. Fridays were supposed to be fun, exciting, and the perfect time for her to relax. She didn't have training. Her two friends were busy with family stuff, and by some miracle she only had an hour or so of homework, which left her in the rare state of having absolutely nothing to do. Guilt, as opportunistic as ever, saw fit to fill that void. She knew what she said was the truth, but she didn't have to tell him that. She didn't have to state it. He knew better than anybody. All she did was kick him while he was down. He was sure that there was something he could do at UA. They even had a business and general courses as well. Sure, those courses were for people that wanted a license to use their quirk, but there had to be something for him. "Gah." She scratched at the side of her head, trying to get this annoying thought out of there. She didn't have a way to talk to Izuku until training on 𝐬𝐴. She'd apologized to him then. It was that simple. And Tokyo was a big city. There was just no way she was going to randomly bump into him just by wandering around. Slapping her cheeks, she put on a smile and took a deep breath. There was nothing she could do right now, so she might as well just try to enjoy herself. With being bored. Where am I anyways? A busy market street stretched out in front of her. She'd been to it a few times with her friends. There really wasn't a lot interesting there. Maybe some coffee. She could also go window shopping and stare at some leather jackets for when she got her motorcycle license. Just a few more years, and convincing her father to let her get one, but that shouldn't be a big problem if she got good grades and got into UA. The sidewalk shook under her feet as thunder roared past her, stunning her for a second before she turned towards its source. Smoke rose into the clear blue sky, its base dyed orange by flames. Another explosion went off, this one nearly sending her to the ground. Panic spread like wildfire. People ran from the explosion while others, heroes mostly, ran towards it. She wasn't a hero. Not yet. She shouldn't be rushing towards danger. She might only make things worse. She should just let the professionals handle it, but then she'd miss out on a chance to watch some pros at work. Or maybe there was something she could do. She followed the crowd towards the explosion. A crowd gathered at the entrance. A few pro heroes and police officers were blocking civilian entry. She recognized a few of them, with the likes of Mount Lady looming in the distance, unable to enter the narrow shopping district, and Kamui Woods attempting to rescue people from the fire, and even Death Arms fighting against what appeared to be liquid sewage that was going wild. The sludge whirled back. She saw a face and an eye somewhere in that mass of goo. That wasn't just somebody's quirk. That was somebody. The idea of having a quirk that would turn her into a living pile of sludge made her queasy. No wonder the guy was a villain. "It's no good," she heard a hero say. It was impossible to tell which one as the whole line of them retreated back. "I can't seem to get a grip, and he's taken a student with a powerful quirk hostage. The explosions make it difficult to even get to him." There was a student somewhere inside of that. Another set of explosions went off, this time blasting away part of the sludge, and for an instant, she saw the hand of the boy that was trapped inside of there. What on earth was happening? How was he struggling so much? When the heroes said he had a strong quirk, they weren't kidding. Still, there has to be something they can do right, she asked herself, looking for another hero or something. Everybody was just standing around watching this go on. What were they waiting for? "Hey, isn't that the villain All Might dealt with earlier?" someone from the crowd said, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did he escape? Where's All Might?" "All Might's here. Why isn't he dealing with this? I hope he shows up soon. No matter how strong that kid's quirk is, he's been going at it for a while. He has to be tired." Where's All Might? She bit her lip, standing on her tippy toes to try and look over the crowd of people. None of them looked like heroes, not even remotely close. There was a skinny blonde man next to her that was looking like he might have a heart attack. His face was twisted into a scowl of pain and anger. Hey, are you all right? She took a step closer to him. The last thing this situation needed was someone else needing a hospital trip. Oh, I'm fine, thank you. The smile he put on lasted for a few seconds before he glared back at the situation. Just frustrated that I can't do anything to help is all. Maybe he was a retired hero like her father was. He'd get furious that he wouldn't be able to save anybody. That might be why he was so diligent about teaching people martial arts. Don't idiot. Stop. Renewed panic brought out from the crowd. You'll die. The crowd was in the way. She saw 𝗳𝗏𝗏𝗻𝐵 trying to grab at something. She saw the slime monster, the student trapped inside of it. And then, between the two sides, mixed in the flames and smoke, she saw Izuku sprinting towards the danger. Izuku. She turned, pushing her way through the crowd. That stupid, idiotic, giant pig-headed moron. What the hell did he think he was doing? She broke through the crowd and kept going, heading right towards Izuku. If she got there in time, she might be able to save him. Stop him from hurting himself or just making things worse. He was going to get hurt. Or worse. Get back here. A strong arm blocked her from moving forward, nearly knocking her to the ground, before she was grabbed and pushed back into the crowd. Don't be stupid. We don't need anybody else getting hurt. Then stop him. She pushed his hand back, pointing towards Izuku. The villain was ready to strike at Izuku, its sludge spiraling upwards and drawn back like a whip from the destruction around them. There was little hope in Izuku surviving a blow like that. He'll die. I know, 𝗳𝗏𝗏𝗻𝐵 growled. But that doesn't mean you have to. Izuku tossed his bag at the monster, by some miracle hitting it in the face and stunning it so that its attack missed, dropping back down into the whirling ball of sludge. That would have been his chance to escape. But Izuku, that stupid idiot, charged forward, grappling at the slime to try and get the student still trapped inside of the creature. I don't know why. She heard his voice carry through the destruction. My legs moved on their own. Ah, so that's what her father had meant about him. Hopelessly heroic. You looked like you were asking for help. Izuku was pushed back by the slime and it wound up another attack. The slime swung its massive jagged tooth maw, opening up to shout. Stop it. Stop getting in my way. Does he have a damn death wish? He'll die for nothing. 𝗳𝗏𝗏𝗻𝗵𝗏 and 𝐒𝐴MUI and the other heroes all tried to move forward, desperate to save Izuku's life. But it was too late. A blow like that. She turned away, unable to watch him. Then she saw him. It was for less than a second, faster than a flash of light. But the wind that followed guided her back towards the action. Smoke covered the area. The lesson I left you with. I should practice what I preach. It was a voice that everybody recognized, and everybody looked up in speechless awe at the #1 pro hero. All Might. He had Izuku by the arm. The other student as well. A pro should always be ready to risk his life. Detroit Smash. She saw the punch, how it moved, the raw strength behind it. Then she felt it. The force of it was enough to kick up a vacuum, sending her hair and skirt flying. Something wet fell on her face. At first she was worried it was that sludge monster. Then reality kicked in and she saw the clouds come flying in. With a single punch, All Might had changed the weather. Guess that was why he was the #1 hero. And Izuku was on the ground, looking completely out of it. She took a step forward and stepped on a notebook. It was blue and looked like it was burned, water damaged, and that it had been through a lot. It was titled Hero Analysis for the Future by Itsuka Midoriya No. 13. This was one of the notebooks he mentioned last night. With the heroes on crowd control and the ambulances arriving, she wouldn't be able to get to Izuku anytime soon. But at least he was safe now. Thumbing open the notebook, she saw that it was filled with detailed notes on pro heroes and their quirks, from Kami Woods to Mount Lady, even a few that she hadn't even known about. There were a few on some students, and then she got near the center and found herself. Izuku wasn't an amazing artist, but he certainly had a cute style. She was drawn in her training gi, complete with a crane pose. Despite only seeing her use her quirk a few times, he had some good notes on it, combined with thoughts about how she could use it in combination with martial arts in ways she didn't think of. He was rather good at this. Maybe this is something he can do at UA. Flipping to the last page, she saw it was an autograph of All Might. That was neat. At least he wouldn't have to ask him for his autograph after being saved by him. She needed a pen or something. 40. You must be out of your mind. 𝗳𝗏𝗏𝗻𝗵𝗏 all but screamed at him. The other heroes were also glaring at him. There was absolutely no need for you to put yourself in danger. You could have made things much worse. If All Might hadn't have shown up, then he nodded, trying his best to not break out into tears. Well, any more tears. There was a good chance that he didn't have much crying left in him for today. Oh, who was he kidding? Kacchan was right, and he was nothing but a crybaby. Even today, all he did was cry and make things worse for everybody. What were you trying to even? At least he was doing something. A voice he recognized tore him from his inner thoughts and pushed back 𝗳𝗏𝗏𝗻𝗵𝗏, scalding. He looked up and saw Itsuka in her school uniform. She looked weird in a skirt. You guys just stood there and waited for someone else to show up. What? 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 reeled back looking like Itsuka had just slapped him across the face. Listen, I know that you were worried about your friend, and we wanted to help the other kid, but there was just nothing that we could do without putting more lives in danger. Itsuka stood between them, her arms crossed. The notebook that Kacchan had ruined today was in her hand. Then back off. He's just some kid. Don't take out your own useless out on him. Itsuka, he said, forcing a smile onto his face and looking up at her. It's fine. I know he's right. I really shouldn't have gone out there. Oh, I know. I just wanted to yell at you instead of him. She turned to him, a great big smile on her face before she bopped him on the head with his notebook. You dropped this, by the way. He grabbed the notebook, holding it to his chest and staring at Itsuka's feet. She was right about yesterday. All Might had confirmed that. Thanks, I didn't know I dropped it. She grabbed him by the wrist, pulling him to his feet. There was something off about the whole thing, and he was forced to actually look at Itsuka. Her lips were twisted into a half frown while her green eyes bore into him. He wasn't good at reading emotions, and even less so when it came to girls. She was probably furious at him. They were friends, weren't they? He thought they were, but maybe she's just annoyed he did something stupid, just like All Might must be. He needed to apologize to both of them. I want to say I'm sorry. Itsuka let out a long breath, one hand running through her long orange hair. She looked away from him and tried to smile. Huh, what? Why are you apologizing? She shrugged, gesturing to the scene around them. Last night, I said that you wouldn't get into 𝐬𝐽 without a quirk. Oh, right. Well, you're not wrong. He lowered his head, clutching his notebook to his chest. It hurt. The truth really hurt. It took all of his strength to not hold on to the dream of becoming a hero that saved people. Apparently, he still had tears left to cry. All Might even told me I should give up on becoming a hero. I don't think you have a choice in the matter. Kendo turned to the side, both hands behind her back. I mean, you knew that you couldn't do anything this time, but you still had to do something right. Yeah, but why was she trying to support him? He nearly died, and he could have caused other too. And this whole thing was his fault to begin with. If he hadn't have grabbed onto All Might's legs, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. It could have gone so much worse, especially with All Might's time limit. Look, I don't want to see you get hurt either. She pressed a finger into his journal. But I think that this is something you could do. So I think you should try to get into 𝐬𝐽. Besides, they have a general course. I'm sure you could fit in there if you want to get a job working with heroes so they can save people better, right? It wasn't the same. But maybe she had a point. But it wasn't the same. Thanks, Itsuka, but I think I need some time to think. There was no point in getting his hopes up. That could just make things worse later. I'll see you later. You're coming to training tomorrow, right? He didn't know. Maybe it was time to start dreaming of a more realistic future. One where he got an office job and tried to stay away from heroes, even if he knew he wouldn't be happy with it, and tricking himself into thinking that he was doing something special by studying martial arts, even if he wasn't good at it. I think I might take a day off. He laughed, holding up his arm. I'm a bit sore after everything that's happened today. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth. Far from it. Oh, she frowned. It's been fun having you around, so I hope you make it. She tossed her long orange ponytail over her shoulder. Well, I'll see you later, Izuku. I should go let my dad know I didn't do anything stupid. She waved to him, placing her hands in her pockets, and headed off. She turned, walking backward and smiling at him again. Oh, and check my page in your notebook. She saw his notes on her. Oh no, what did that mean? Did she think he was a creep for drawing her? Was she weirded out by him? Did he see his notes? Of course, she saw his notes. Did he get something wrong? He barely managed to wave goodbye back to her before his panic was showing. 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 walked up behind him and patted him on the back. The adult smiled down at him and rubbed his nose. Look, kid, she seems like a nice girl, but next time try not to do something so stupid just to impress a girl. It probably wasn't a good idea to tell him that he didn't even know she was around. Instead, he nodded, opening up his notebook to her page. Everything looked the same save for a bit of sidewise writing. It was a small pouting face with Itsuka's sideways ponytail next to a phone number and a text me. He blinked, rereading those two numbers and making sure that all the numbers were there. They were. Well, I guessed it worked. 𝗧𝗏𝗄𝐻 slapped him on the back once more. Way to go, kid, you got her number. Now don't do anything stupid again. Somehow, despite everything that had happened today, getting Itsuka's number was a highlight of it. That was until on his way home All Might found him again and told him he could become a hero and that he could be the next vessel of One for All. 4-hit combo. Chapter text. Kotsu found the empty spot left by Izuku Midoriya unsightly, yet he could not look away from it. After the events that transpired Friday, he had hoped that perhaps Izuku would have thrown himself into his training, though it was beginning to seem as though his fear that it would drive Izuku away and crush his spirit before it could become tempered into something stronger. It was more frustration than a shame. Perhaps it was because of how much Izuku reminded him of his brother, but that young Midoriya had become his second favorite student. right after his own daughter, of course. He was frustrated at the abandonment of potential, but the greatest shame was that he could not be able to see what kind of man he could forge Izuku into. He shook his head, nearly laughing to himself, though perhaps he was giving himself too much credit as a sensei. It had only been 2 days. And perhaps Izuku was simply resting. Nearly dying was a trying ordeal, one that Izuku seemed far too familiar with for a boy his age. It only made sense that he would seek to take a day or 2 off. Itsuka looked at him. Caught mid-stretch, he'd remind her that her pose was off later, and offered him a shrug. No doubt she was racking herself with guilt about not helping him more. All right, he clapped his hands, drawing the attention of his students towards him. You all have performed excellently today. With a fist in his hand, he gave them a bow, one that they eagerly returned. Respect certainly was a wonderful thing. Class is dismissed. I will see you all Tuesday. The students all began their usual shuffling, some stretching to relax their posture, a few forced their joints to pop obnoxiously, a few went right for the door, most went towards the locker room. Perhaps he'd have a nice cup of tea. Tea sounded wonderful right about now. Maybe he could even get his daughter to serve him tea. Itsuka, could I trouble you? For he began with a smile, extending a hand out to his daughter. Every day she was looking more and more like her mother, though that might just be his lonely heart talking and the orange of her hair. Personality-wise, the two couldn't be more different. Aside from the headstrong part, her daughter rolled her green eyes, one hand going to her hip. If you're going to ask for tea, save it. I have homework tonight, and Sundays are your night to cook. Tea does not take so long. He folded his arms and looked towards the lone clock, hoping to coax her eyes into following. Besides, I ended class early today, and it would make your Izuku stood in the entranceway breaking the flow like a rock in the river. He was dressed in shorts and a shirt that was self-aware enough to have T-shirt written on it. There was a tiredness about him. Not from lack of sleep, it was the kind of glow that followed a hard day's work full of purpose. Guarded in his hands like it was sacred texts was a stack of papers, and then there was a fire in his eyes. Friday's events had changed Izuku, but he had been a fool to worry. If not for me, perhaps you'd be so kind as to make some for our tardy disciple. He ruffled her hair in the way that annoyed her the most and walked towards the conflicted young man, only looking back for a moment, though I'm sure he'd think it awkward to be the only one to receive tea. He might get the wrong idea. His headstrong daughter simply rolled her eyes and headed towards the kitchen. Fine, just don't scare him off or anything. You tend to make things worse. When had he ever done that? Clapping his hands, he felt his cheeks pull into a tight smile. Ah, Izuku, I'm afraid you've already missed class for the day. Izuku jumped, feet, legs, and shoulders squirming while his hands remained perfectly still lest they so much as crinkle those sacred texts. Still nervous and unsure of himself as ever it seemed, was waiting for class to be over. He bit his lip and calmed himself, if only for a moment. I kind of want it. Well, not that I want to, it's just that I have to, because I don't think that I'll be able to, that is, A single hand on his shoulder calmed Izuku for half a second before the jittering started up again. Come now, Izuku. Whatever you need to say can be said simply. Just state your intent. His finger clenched, wrinkling those papers, and his eyes were drawn towards the ground. I won't be able to come to class anymore. I see. This was unacceptable. Both the way it was spoken and the act itself. If that is what your heart desires, I will not stop you. He motioned towards the meeting room where he had first spoken the boy. But, come, I think an explanation will do us both some good. Okay, Izuku muttered, his head still down. He took his usual seat on the bench, once more regretting the decision to not cushion the damn thing for the sake of aesthetics and authenticity. Just because they trained their bodies to ignore pain did not mean that did not relish comfort. Now then, you said that you won't be able to come to my class anymore. Why is that? I know it is not fear or lack of desire that drove you to say that. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and covering his face so Izuku could not see his smile. The difference was subtle in Izuku, or perhaps he was just reading what wasn't there. Then again, he hadn't been wrong before. I can see it in your eyes, Izuku. You have a purpose now, a motivation to match that discipline of yours, and I won't be letting that slip through my fingers without proper reason. While Izuku had no inherent love for martial arts, there was an eagerness in there that gave him hope that one day this young man could become quite exceptional. But, again, that could just be because this was something that was still new and exciting for the young boy. Well, Friday, I met someone. He refused to look him in the eyes and bit his lip. That lone crinkle in those papers was all that marred them. And he was my heir. Well, he's someone that I looked up to a great deal. It was all might. That much was obvious. With the events, the way the boy spoke, and his unwillingness to so much as giving a name, that was the only conclusion. Izuku bit his lip and finally made eye contact. There it was. There was that roaring fire. It was fueled by mind, heart, and soul, with only the body unable to join in its intensity. Such a fire might consume the boy if his body couldn't keep up. But that was where he came in. He said that if I worked hard enough that my dreams would come true, and that he would help me along the way, but that I needed to do a lot of it on my own. so I'm going to give that a shot. What ideas was that weirdo Toshinori feeding this boy? I see. Well, I'm happy you have found a direction for your heart to take. He held out his hand, gesturing towards the papers. And this is the path this man has set out for you. Yes, Izuku nodded, his back pressed against the wall. May I see them? It took a moment, like coaxing a cat out of a bush with nothing more than sweet words. But eventually, the papers were in his hands. All-American Dream Plan was written at the top. Yep, it was all might. The plan itself was sound, including both dietary and a scaling workout plan for the next 10 months that was targeting the whole body. It was designed with Izuku's body, potential growth rates, and current state in mind, to ensure that he would work out to the maximum each and every day, assuming that Izuku would follow through with it. There is just one problem. The plan didn't account for Izuku's drive. I see. And are you committed to this path? There wasn't much of a point to ask that question. More specifically, do you plan to follow this plan to the letter, even when you feel as though you can do more? Should do more? Are you going to give it your all, and what did All Might say? Go even further beyond. Are you going to give it your ultra plus ultra? Dad, his lovely daughter corrected him, placing a warm cup of tea in front of Izuku first, before placing one in front of him. It smelled lovely, like a good fresh oolong. It's good to see you, Izuku. Are you feeling better? The boy tensed up like he had just drunk an entire pot of the most caffeinated coffee on the market. Black, with no sugar. He sucked his lips. That usual shyness he had around his daughter, or indeed any girl, was back again. He grabbed the cup, taking a small sip of it, before staring into it to avoid eye contact. I'm fine, thanks. That's good. Itsuka sat down next to him, across from Izuku, and looked between them, a curious look in her eyes. You're not going to quit, are you? Well, I mean, it's not like I want to or anything, Izuku began, holding the cup with both hands, his body trying to become as small as possible so that he might fit down into it. Ought to let his disciple suffer or to come to his aid. Best to strike while the iron was embarrassed. Actually, we were just modifying Izuku's schedule. Both sets of green eyes locked onto him. He shuffled the stack of papers, fanning them gently. Izuku has been offered a chance for something great, but he still desires to train here with us. As such, he will be making it to class when he can. And he will even show up during his free time for intensive physical training. No, Itsuka shoved a finger into his side. You're not going to scare him away with your hellish training. He can take it. You want to keep training me? Izuku asked. His eyes were wide, but he was smiling now. Why? Because you are my student, and it is my duty to see your training through. He placed a hand down onto the wooden table between them, standing up and looking down at his disciple. I am a selfish man, Izuku. When you say the word sensei, your heart will know that title is mine above all others. Now then, will you allow me to? He paused, feeling the cursed blessed words on his lips once more. Memories of his own time undergoing the training flashed before his eyes. Cruel was an understatement. It had taken all of his own willpower to merely survive that harsh physical conditioning. More than a few had left that school before the first day had ended. There was no great secret to the training, just an application of pushing the body beyond its own limits so the spirit would carry it further. With the right motivation, Izuku might be able to take it. Harden your body with the ancient techniques of 1,000 schools bound together by the teachings of Rizanpaku. He tossed the papers to the side and held out a hand to Izuku. Will you trust me? Izuku grabbed his hand faster than he had thought. Only time would tell if that eagerness would be able to weather the torment he was about to inflict upon Izuku. Will I still be able to follow that plan? Izuku asked, looking down at the scattered papers. You won't need to. My training will give you those results twofold. Maybe 1 1/3 if he pushed it, but still better results. But I do have one requirement. For this, one small request. All eyes were still on him, his daughter rolling her finger to tell him to get on with it. Well, he sighed, sitting back down and restacking the papers. The wind was gone from his sail now. Despite having been a dojo for 8 years now, I haven't had a reliable team for competitions. And as such, I have no trophies. Those that come to my school with the desire to compete quickly go to the other larger dojos or join their school teams. However, I would like to change that. In about 7 months there will be a tournament for middle schoolers. I would like both of you to compete in it. He shrugged. I was going to ask you closer to the actual date, as I felt like it would be good practice for you both. And he really wanted a trophy. By then Izuku would only be practicing for like 9 months. Itsuka pulled at her ponytail and ran a hand through those long orange locks she got from her mother. I mean, I'll go. But are you sure Izuku will be ready? I know that you wish to go to you. He placed a hand on her head, messing up her hair in the way that annoyed her the most. And unless I misoverheard, so does Izuku. The entrance exam to UO will be much harsher than some middle school tournament, and it's 3 months after that. Besides, I believe I can get Izuku ready in 7 months. At least good enough not to lose in the first few rounds. To badly. I'll do it. Izuku nodded, his timidness fighting a losing battle against his resolve. Excellent. He clapped his hands. We'll start right now. He used his quirk, hearing his knee pop loudly as he stepped over his daughter's head with his elongated legs, and then once they were normal length began to walk towards the yard. Come Izuku, there's still daylight. Hey, you're supposed to cook dinner tonight. 40 after an hour or two. There were many things Itsuka had expected when she came down to check on them. Izuku passed out from exhaustion. A team of paramedics, her father throwing her a shovel claiming that Izuku wasn't feeling very well while he shouldered a body-shaped bag of trash. Naturally, the reality of the situation was both better in that Izuku was alive, and worse in that her father was actually doing something that was borderline barbaric. Izuku was strapped to a pull-up bar around the knees, securing him in place in a way so that he could do a hanging sit-up. Coming from a boy that could barely do a push-up 2 months ago, it was impressive. Though the fact that he was still lighter than her probably helped matters. But it wasn't so much what Izuku was doing, struggling, as much as it was what her father was doing. He had a small fire pit going directly below Izuku, and this was why he never got any serious students. Dad, what the hell are you doing? She stopped over to him. Did he think this was some anime or something? Pain is a powerful motivator. Her father turned to her, showing his teeth, and that cold glint in his blue eyes was present. Yep, he had to enjoy the pain of others to some degree. He stood dusting off his knees and stretched. But hunger is not what's for dinner. She snorted, rolled her eyes, and stomped over to put out the fire. I made me instant noodles, you're on your own. Izuku let out a groan, his body relaxing fully once the fire was out. Thank you, you're crazy. She pulled at the straps holding him up and helped him to the ground. Look, if you're going to do this training, don't let my dad do anything that involves fire. It really doesn't help. Or sharp things. Got it? Izuku nodded, dusting his legs off and letting out a groan. A hand went to his stomach as he tried to stand. I don't think my stomach has ever hurt this much. Are you in your rebellious phase? Her father asked, all but pouting that he'd have to make his own dinner or eat ramen noodles. I thought we agreed that you'd tell me if you were entering your rebellious phase. There was only so far she could roll her eyes. You'll be fine, Izuku. Just don't do a sit-up for a while and you should be fine. Also sleep on your back. Do you think you can make it home okay? I'll be fine. His laughter died into a groan. I made it here after this morning. I should be able to make it home. What did you do in the morning? Her face scrunched up. It was Sunday. Their day off. Even she slept in on Sundays. And she normally woke up when her dad did. Izuku stood straight, wincing at the sudden motion. Oh, just helping someone out with some appliances is all. But, you're right, I should probably head home. I'm sure my mom is worried about me. A secret, huh? Alright, text me when you get home so I don't have to worry about you collapsing at the train station. And this was why people called her bossy. Still, part of her was curious to see if Izuku could stick with the training. And what would happen if he did? She waved him off. See ya. He waved back, nearly stumbling on the first step back inside. Bye. Her father stood behind her, smiling ear to ear. Clearly he was overjoyed that he was able to walk his inner sadist for a bit. Now, about my dinner. She rolled her eyes and groaned. Maybe she should start her rebellious phase. Summer vacation meant many things to Itsuka. Most of them were boring. It meant waking up early with her father to see the sunrise. It meant doing chores, getting extra training, being bored out of her mind as the steamy summer heat suffocated her. It also meant wishing that she actually had a close group of friends to come and invite her out to do stuff. Or for her to invite out to do stuff. It wasn't that she was an outcast, rather she just didn't really belong to any one group. Most of the time it wasn't that big of a deal. She was normally too busy with the dojo, schoolwork, or various other things. It just sucked when she had free time, like right now. Maybe she should see if Izuku was free to do something, assuming he could even stand straight long enough to do anything. Even without the extra motivation her father wanted to use, he was still training an insane amount and was tired constantly. She'll ask him when she saw him next. He deserved at least some kind of a break. Before he trained himself into the hospital. At this rate he was going to be too tired to learn any martial arts to use for that tournament her father signed them up for. Tightening up her shoes. And checking her phone one last time. Surprise, no messages. Turned on her music and adjusted her running gear. This was her first time going out before 6 for a run. But it was the best way to beat the heat and get out of the home and dojo. That, and it didn't cost any money. Okay, she called, looking back half expecting her father to be looming behind her with some kind of a chore for her to do. He wasn't there. He might not have been in earshot. I'm heading out for a bit. I'll see you later. Oh, her father stuck his head out from the corner. His salt and pepper mustache was wild this morning, and his black hair was free falling past his shoulder. Where are you going? Just a run. She smiled, bouncing on one foot to the other. These new shoes felt pretty great. I think I'll head to the beach for a bit. I'll be back in time for class. She had a hand on the door before her father could try to stop her, or worse, join her. Bye. See you. The door slammed shut behind her and she hit the ground running, clearing the 3 steps that lead into the dojo with ease. Normally she would head left to get the train and head to her school. Instead, she went right, heading deeper into the Misutafu Prefecture. From there it was a mile of back roads until she came to a river she didn't know the name of despite rolling on its artificial banks as a child several times. Then she'd follow it downstream until she found the beach. Once at the beach, she'd head right again, rolling along the pathway that stretched all the way to the next river. She'd probably turn around once she reached that beach that had basically become a junkyard. Finding her stride was the hard part of running, going just fast enough to feel the burn, to get a runner's high without exhausting herself. She always wanted to go full sprint, to charge until the very end even if doing so would leave her panting for breath halfway through. That was the only reason why she didn't come in first during physicals this year. Gah! She half panted, half shouted, taking a hard left at the river and following it downstream. Her speed was increasing and she glared ahead, her breath coming with every step to push her forward. Izuku was probably out there giving it his all just so that he could get into 𝐻𝐻𝐽𝐻 without a quirk, and she was just taking things at the same pace she always had. If he was doing this to get in 𝐻𝐻𝐽𝐻, then why wasn't she? Just because she had a quirk? Just because she was stronger and knew how to fight already? What if he passed her up? What if he managed to beat her because he kept pushing himself harder and harder while she went on cruise control? Fuck that. Damn it, she shouted, going past a casual run into a full sprint. She didn't want to just be another hero. She didn't want people to ask her name when she saved them. She wanted them to know she wanted to be at the top, and that wasn't going to happen if she kept standing still. Stupid Izuku. Stupid father. Stupid everything. This was all her fault. By the time she reached the end of the river, her legs were screaming at her to stop. Her lungs burned and her brow was slick with sweat. The t-shirt she had worn in favor of a tank top was proving to be a mistake as it began to bunch up around the middle from her heavy movement, and her sweats were proving to be more of an annoyance than anything. It was summer. She should have worn shorts, but she wasn't going to stop. She was going to reach the end of the beach even if it killed her. In the space of a breath, she had just enough time to blame Izuku once again. Apparently his motivation, discipline, or whatever the hell her father saw in the kid. In reality, she was just a very competitive person, and when she was a child got in a staring contest with her own reflection. Her legs were burning, her stomach was grumbling, her lungs were on fire, and her posture had all suffered fatal blows by the time she neared the end of her run. The walkway was ending and turned right to go up a hill, but beyond that sat what once was a beautiful beach, now covered in trash. But her goal was in sight. A lone truck halfway filled with junk was parked in front of the entrance to the beach-turned-junkyard. Just a few more steps. All her energy was drained from her when she touched the truck. A few dying steps were all she could manage before she fell onto the well-maintained grass. The sun was still low in the sky, but she didn't have the faintest idea of what time it was, nor did she have the energy to check. Way to go, Itsuka. You wore yourself out. She flopped onto her back, enjoying the cool sea breeze and warm sun rays for a moment. And now you have to go all the way back. Her legs threatened to cramp in response. At least her feet didn't hurt. New running shoes were a success. With a groan, she slapped herself on the forehead, wiping off the gallon of sweat that must have been there before she let out a laugh that hurt and a smile that also hurt. I can't believe I basically just sprinted 5 miles because of Izuku. She wasn't going to stop though. Come on, you blind fanboy. We've been at it for an hour and the truck is still half full. The voice was harsh and cut through the air like a whip. Your summer vacation is almost over, isn't it, boy? We still have a lot of work to do if you want to get into UA. Coming, another voice replied, though she had to strain herself to be able to hear it over the waves. I'm not giving up. All might. All might. Wait, she recognized that whiny voice. It was Izuku. With a second wind that was barely strong enough to get her to her feet, she looked out onto the beach. There was a swath being carved into the junk, and in the center of that swatch was a gangly blonde man that looked familiar wearing a black tracksuit. And further down the beach wearing a green tracksuit was Izuku. He was struggling to carry an appliance that must have weighed at least 100 pounds, made only worse by its awkward shape and size. She looked around. Why did he say all might? Who was that man? Was he cleaning the beach? Why? Maybe it was part of his training. Didn't the blonde man say something about UA? Stepping down onto the beach, she walked towards them, hands behind her back as she stretched into the warm sun and cool sea breeze. Summer mornings were something magical, at least until the unbearably wet, sticky heat left the entire country covered in sweat. Izuku, she asked, standing near that familiar old man. She'd seen him somewhere. What's going on? Did you get some kind of a summer job? The appliance gave a soft thud when it fell to the ground, embedding itself loose sand. Itsuka, well, what are you doing here? She shrugged, letting out another pant as she caught her breath. I went for a morning run. He didn't need to know that it was because she had nothing better to do. And heard you two from the street. Do you need some help? No, Izuku nearly shouted, flailing his arms about and taking a step back. His cheeks were red. He must be pushing himself hard. This is part of his training. The blonde-haired man spoke, groaning as he ran a hand along the back of his neck. If he follows my workout plan and manages to clear this beach of trash, he'll be that much closer to going to UA. This didn't sound fishy at all. Who are you? She looked back towards Izuku. And didn't I hear you say All Might? Is he around? Oh, well that is. He took another step back looking between her and the man. You misheard. He was calling my name. Though I don't think we've been introduced properly. The man smiled, something that sent a chill down her spine, and gave a small and rather lackluster flex that sent him into a coughing fit. I'm Small Might, All Might's personal trainer. All Might has a personal trainer, and it was this guy. Were they like family or a childhood friend? She needed to be less judgmental of new people. It wasn't healthy. Wait, All Might. Oh, I think I saw you when All Might saved Izuku from that slime villain. That's correct. Small Might clapped his hands in front of him and smiled like an overeager shopkeeper. I recall seeing you then as well, and how you stood up to those heroes for bad-mouthing young Midoriya's bravery. So, why are you training Izuku? She looked around the beach and gestured towards the mountains of scrap. And why by cleaning up the beach? 2 birds with 1 stone, he shrugged, shaking his head. This beach used to be a beautiful spot, so cleaning it up is good charity work and a good workout. And I'm training Izuku because I was impressed by him and his desire to go to you. A spark seemed to flicker in the man's sunken eyes as he looked towards Izuku. It was the same glare her father would get when he was excited about something. I believe that going there would help him another even if he doesn't have a powerful quirk. He laughed, standing up straight with both hands on his hips. At least it worked out for me. Oh, now it made a bit more sense. But why haven't I heard about you before? Wouldn't All Might's personal trainer be highly sought after? We thought it was best to keep it a secret. Then why tell her? He clapped his hands and motioned towards Izuku, a frown back in place. Now then, that's enough of a break. Get back to work. Yes, sir, Izuku chirped, grabbing the appliance and shifting it until he was under its weight. Sorry, Itsuka, I'll see you later. Yeah, sure. She stood there watching him slowly walk towards her, the extra give of the sand making a simple trip that much more difficult, while the stairs would also add to the challenge. It actually might be a good workout. Oh, wait, when you have free time do you think we could hang out? When we're not training or something? It's been kind of a boring summer. Oh, I'm there, he went stuttering again. Shame they couldn't train a backbone into him. I might not if there's a fireworks festival this Friday. Why don't you two go? Small Might nodded, folding his arms. Yes, that would be a good way to relax before the exam season starts up, and then you really won't have any free time. I'll even see if I can't get All Might to make an appearance. Yeah, that sounds like fun, especially since it was actually doing something. But let's not dress up for it. A yukata is so not my style. That and she didn't own one. What do you think, Izuku? His face was beet red and he looked out of it. A fireworks festival, he squeaked, adjusting the appliance. Yeah, just the 2 of us. Right, yeah, sounds fun. Operation Make Her Summer Vacation Not Completely Suck was a success. 40 It was not a date. They were just 2 friends, wearing casual clothes, going to a fireworks festival. It was not a date. It was not a date. It was just them. A boy, a girl, hanging out at a fireworks festival. Nothing more, nothing less. There was absolutely no way that he could even think of it as a date, which was why his stomach had been upset since he woke up. And he showered twice and kept staring at the clock, wondering how early he should go there and how long he wanted to wait around in case Itsuka was late. But what if she was early? How long would he keep her waiting? She was a naturally early person, made she was already there and hadn't texted him yet. It was not a date. Izuku groaned, running his hand through his still wet hair. Hopefully he didn't smell like sweat right now. Not that Itsuka probably cared too much about that, considering how most of the time he was around her he was drenched in sweat, or in some kind of pain. What was he supposed to talk about? What was he supposed to do? The only time he went to the fireworks festival was with his mom, and they haven't done that in a few years. It was not a date. Should he comb his hair? If he did, what would she think? Would she think that he was trying to dress up to impress her? What if he didn't comb his hair but she didn't? What if she put in an effort and showed up with a cute hairdo and a flower in it? No, that wouldn't happen. This was Itsuka. She didn't really do girly stuff like that. Well, at least, that's what he thought. It just didn't seem like the kind of thing she'd do. Her nails were always rough, and he'd only seen her wear her school skirt, but that wasn't really enough to go off. Drumming his finger along his shorts, he glanced up at his All Might clock. He still had a while to go. A long while. Maybe he should be training again. A little bit of extra weight training wouldn't hurt anything. Or at least he hoped it was normal to be in a constant state of soreness. Besides, it might help him relax and take his mind off the not date he had with Itsuka. His phone buzzed, tearing his attention away from the hand dumbbells and back into a state of panic. Was she canceling? Was All Might going to make him do something? Was it a death threat from Kendo-sensei? He seemed like the type. It was a text from Itsuka and his heart sank. Hey Izuku, do you mind if we meet up a bit early? I'm bored out of my mind here and I think my dad is trying to think up chores to give me. Oh, he was worried over nothing. He was still going to go on his not date with Itsuka. Yay, sure, same place. It took him a bit longer to text that than it should have, considering how his hands were shaking so much that he hit the buttons several times. Awesome. She put in a smiley face emoji. I'll see you there. It wasn't a date. It wasn't a date. It was not a date. They were just friends going to the fireworks festival alone. Slipping on his shoes, he told his mom where he was going and slipped out the door before she could start making assumption. Finding Itsuka was the easy part. Her orange hair made her stand out even among a crowd of mutation quirks, though it was probably just because of how often he looked at her hair that he was able to find it so easily among the loose crowd of people that was gathering as twilight approached. She was wearing a simple jean jacket that went to her waist, and a light blue sundress that went all the way to her bare knees, and boots. Heavy-duty boots, the kind that would suck to get kicked by and were made more for climbing a mountain than walking around a festival. But she was also wearing a dress. A sundress was still technically a dress. A smile broke out onto her face when she saw him and she waved him over while heading right towards him. This wasn't going to be one of those cases where he thought someone was excited to see him, but it was actually someone behind him. He still checked behind him. Izuku, hey, how's it going? Words failed to come out of his mouth. He wanted to say that she looked cute, but that might be too much. Was he supposed to say that to a girl? A girl that was just his friend? He never had a friend that was a girl. Hell, he barely had a friend that wanted to do stuff with him in middle school. You're wearing a dress. That was what he managed to say. Itsuka snorted, looking down at her outfit, her hands still in the jacket pockets as she shrugged. Do I really come off as such a tomboy? Really, when I start worrying that my nails might break when I'm practicing, then you can worry about it. Yeah, he mumbled, fidgeting with his fingers. I can't see that. He paused, looking up at her. What happens to nail polish when you use your quirk? Falls off. She shrugged, pulling out one of her hands to show him. Helps me clean them though, just grow them a bit and the dirt falls right now. But enough about that. Let's go enjoy ourselves before school starts up again. She grabbed him by the wrist and pulled him into the corridor of stands. They went with the crowd, pausing at every stand that caught their interest. There was a takoyaki, even a few candies, all of which Itsuka was quite happy to eat and force him to eat. It was the game booths where the real fun was had, attempting to catch fish. Neither one of them were good at that game. Ring tosses, baseball throwing, and more. It felt like that they went through every single game stall before the sun even set, and another half by the time the fireworks were supposed to start. Hey, Itsuka pulled on his arm again, pointing at a path that led uphill to a flat area. The Ryukyu mask she had one sitting on the back of her head. She had been smiling ear to ear since the festival started. Let's go watch the fireworks up there. I bet we'll be able to see the fireworks pretty good. Yay. He let her take the date, never more than a few steps behind her as they walked the winding trail up the hilltop. It was subtle, but there was a change in atmosphere. The groups of people they encountered were growing smaller, from families with children to groups of friends, until once they reached the top, there was nothing but couples. Itsuka, she asked, barely looking back as she bounded over to the railings, placing both hands on it and jumping up. If she noticed the other couples around them, holding hands, kissing, and the romantic atmosphere around them, she didn't care. And why should she? It was not a date after all. Thanks for inviting me out tonight. It's been a lot of fun. Even if All Might was going to push him hard tomorrow, and probably Kendo-sensei. Yeah, thanks for joining me. It would have sucked to go out on my own. She hopped up onto the railing, twirling her legs so that she sat on it and gestured towards an empty spot next to her. We should do it again sometime. As important as training, studying, and practice is, I think we need to relax a bit every so often. A firework exploded, lighting up the night sky with All Might's smiling face, followed quickly by Endeavor and the rest of the top 10 heroes in order. He might have missed his birthday training, but this was as good as any. We have 6 months until the UA entrance exams, and only 3 before that tournament. He kept his eyes on the sky, watching as the fireworks went up and exploded. His voice carried over the booms easily. I want to give them my all. I'll do the same. I don't plan on letting you outdo me anytime soon. 6-finger death slap chapter text. Itsuka broke his guard. She went in towards his exposed chest, fully intending to finish this match in the opening move. Not now, not again. Izuku took a step back, deflecting her attack so that it grazed his arm. His limbs felt heavy, muscles screaming at him from the combined assault of working out, training, and now sparring. No doubt Itsuka would be leaving yet another bruise on him before this was over. He regained his footing with a stomp, planting himself firmly in place to deal with her next attack. They had 2 days before the tournament. And for the past week, Kendo-sensei had been drill martial arts into his mind and body non-stop. In many ways, it was worse than All Might's training, but that might be because All Might was still pushing him to his limits and even further beyond. There was not a single part of him that didn't hurt. A pause, barely more than a moment, passed between them, Itsuka's hot breath barely visible in the chill autumn weather that choked Japan in its grips. She was tired. They'd been at this for hours now, her brow drenched in sweat. But there was a smile on her face that betrayed her tiredness. Was he smiling too? He couldn't feel his cheeks. If he waited too long, then Itsuka would go on the attack. If he acted too soon, then Itsuka would block into a counterattack that would finish him quickly. But it was better than being on the defensive. He lunged forward, keeping his feet low to the ground and under him. His first blow was aimed at the center of her black top, where she would have to block him. She did, with one arm, windmilling his attack up and away. Perfect. Leg sweep, hook below the ankles, pull. Her eyes went wide when she felt her footing slip out from under her. Had he done it? Had he finally managed to beat Itsuka? It had only taken 1,000 or more tries. Then he saw her smile as she went down, bending backward and catching herself on her hands, feet aimed directly at him. She pushed off the ground, rocketing towards him in a spiral. Block. He had to blow. He blocked her kick with his exposed open chest and was sent to the ground, the wind all but forced from his lungs. Once more he found himself staring up at the ceiling. The taste of defeat was fresh in his mouth, and his entire body was screaming at him that it was ready to go on strike if working conditions did not improve drastically. Evidently, today was not the day he would beat Itsuka. Shit, he heard Itsuka swear. Izuku, I'm sorry, I just kind of got sucked into the fight. She stomped over to him, her long auburn hair pulled into a ponytail that glistened with sweat. She wiped a hand on her black baggy sweatpants and offered it to him. Are you okay? I also kind of thought you'd block that. Her hand was warm, firm, and full of calluses. She pulled him up with a surprising amount of ease. I'm fine. He smiled, placing his hands on his knees to keep from falling over. Despite the fact that his muscles were plotting a mass spasm that would have him hospitalized, he was fine. Every breath burned like he was finally getting fresh air after years of drowning. I'm just a little worn out, as you should be. Kendo-sensei placed a hand on his shoulder. His smile was wide enough that barely a spark could be seen of his eyes. You are still in the forge. While the shape is there, you still need to be tempered. He brushed his mustache, offering him a half shrug. And just like forging a blade, it is important to cool the body before it is ready. Maybe. I don't know how to forge a sword. I'm not that kind of sensei. I don't even own a sword. Yes, we do. Itsuka took a step back to avoid her father's hand from falling on her shoulder. It's hanging in the dining room. Oh, that's just a hilt and a scabbard. Itsuka's face twisted as she rolled her eyes. Whatever, but do you think we're ready for the tournament this weekend? You, certainly. Her father flipped his hand a few times like he was moving an invisible abacus. I think you'll either make it to the finals or semifinals. Kendo-sensei turned to him, finger on his chin. As for you, Izuku, try not to lose in the first round. Dad. Itsuka swatted him in the chest. Show some more support. Kendo-sensei laughed, his whole body shaking. Come now, Itsuka. He's only been training with us for 9 months now. Many of the students participating in the tournament have been eating and breathing martial arts since they were born. Kendo-sensei grabbed his head, roughing up his hair and jostling him around a bit. I'm not going to lie to one of my favorite pupils. He can catch up to them, but many are beyond his grasp. Besides, it's his first tournament. Expecting success the first time you do something is to set yourself up for a bitter defeat. Expecting to lose readies you to learn from your mistakes. He paused, shrugging once more and waved his hands. It also sets you up to lose. Don't be negative and you'll do fine. Was that supposed to help? Itsuka glared at her father's back, hands on her hips. I'll do my best, sensei. He bowed, stomach muscles protesting at the sudden movement. He was only expected to get to the second round. He'd get at least into the quarterfinals. Besides, All Might was going to be there. He had to prove to him that all this extra training would also help him become a vessel worthy of one for all. Oh, I expect you'll give me more than your best, Izuku. Kendo-sensei turned to him, the cold silver of his blue eyes burning deep expectations into him. But just so you know, once this tournament is over, your real training begins. If you thought what we did previously was harsh, you're about to enter a whole new level of dad. Itsuka stomped her feet at her father. Stop trying to act cool. Fine, Kendo-sensei deflated, letting out a breath, his smile still present. But I will be stepping up your training after this. But for tomorrow, your training is to rest. No sense in you showing what you can do when you're half dead. Though perhaps that might be a boon if you're entering 𝐴40. This felt like a waste of time, both for him and young Midoriya. Toshinori found a seat high in the stands where fewer people sat. But, true to his word, young Midoriya had kept to his word, somehow managing to balance school, his own grueling training on the beach, and whatever training the boy's martial arts instructor had been given him, and somehow managed to stay alive. If the boy had anything, it was mental fortitude. Months ago it had gone from a matter of will the boy becomes worthy to win. Not that he'd tell him that. One for all would remain with him until that beach was clean. It was just a matter of making it to UA this year. The stadium was sparse, taking place at a high school gym, and was primarily for middle school students just on their way to high schools. Higher schoolers made up much of the crowd, likely club members looking for potential new recruits for the next year. Parents made of the minority of the class. Kid made it sound like it was something much more important than some middle school tournament. He smiled, shaking his head and leaning forward. It was easy to find his disciple. Was that the correct word? Future successor, protege. It really didn't matter what title he gave Izuku. Besides, he couldn't let the public know, not yet, not with All for One still out there. It was easy to find Izuku, if not for his green hair then for the fact that he often stood next to that girl with orange hair that could stand out just about anywhere. It really was an eye-catching color. His student was kneeling next to the girl, dressed in a martial arts gi and looking as nervous as could be. Behind them stood Izuku's kendo sensei, a happy-faced old man that looked ever so familiar. The girl, Itsuka, if he remembered Izuku's mumbling correctly, looked right at him and smiled, elbowing Izuku in the arm before nodding at him. Izuku's eyes went wide, his fanboy nature kicking in as he recognized him. He only glanced at him half a dozen times over the course of a minute while trying to maintain still. He nodded and smiled at the boy, but that did little to calm the boy's nerves. Placing one hand on his head, he groaned. Why did he have to choose such a fanboy? He blamed Dave. The tournament, if it could even be called that, started promptly. There would only be 4 rounds in the tournament. It really did feel much smaller in scale than anything Yua ever did. There was probably going to be more students in his class than were present here. Come now, when did I become such a bitter old man? He slammed a hand to his chest and leaned forward. Might as well enjoy the show. There was something to be said about martial arts. In theory, they served as a way of directing force and energy to make attacks more effective. There are many in the hero world that used them, often with a quirk that modified their body in some way to allow them to use modified techniques more effectively. And results often varied wildly. Of course, there were those that used martial arts to subdue criminals in a non-violent way. But oftentimes fights were decided by determination, equipment, allies, and the sheer power of one's quirk and ability to use it. For him, with One for All, learning martial arts wouldn't add much. That's not to say he couldn't throw a punch. His old sensei beat that into him. But there was little point in attempting to karate chop when a good old American haymaker would do the job 10 times over. What was he thinking? If Gran Torino heard his thoughts, he'd get another beating. Still, he rubbed his eyes and looked at young Midoriya once more. The boy was different from him in many ways. For starters, he was a whole hell of a lot smarter. Perhaps he might be able to make some use of martial arts. Itsuka stepped into the ring, her posture perfect, a balanced amount of pride, self-confidence, and respect for her opponent. She was light on her feet, and her stance was strong. Her opponent, a large boy that had 20 centimeters on her and a lot more bulk, were closer to a bull in a china shop. From the moment the match began, Itsuka was in complete control, not only through technique, strategy, and patience, but through strength as well. It was over in a matter of moments, with the boy being pushed out of bounds. He might enjoy these matches more if he knew the rules. Izuku's match was a few bouts later, on the opposite side of the bracket. He leaned forward, focusing on his student. 7 months had passed when he first met that scrawny little child that had no hopes of ever doing a simple pull-up, and while by most standards he still was scrawny, he was not the same child, at least on the outside. Izuku's stance oscillated between the calm perfection of a master and the erratic chaos of an amateur enthusiast. His opponent outclassed Izuku in every category: confidence, composure, size, strength, experience, technique. The odds were stacked against him. He was the underdog by a long shot. A perfect test. He leaned forward, smiling into his hands as he kept his eyes focused on Izuku, a thrill tingling his spine. Show me what you have learned, young Midoriya. Show me that I was right to trust you. Show me what you can do with no quirk. 40. He was making a fool out of himself in front of Kendo Sensei, Itsuka, All Might, and his mom. There was no way he was ready for this. His muscles were still sore, his body was still screaming at him for the hell he'd put it through, and he had no idea what on earth he was doing. He was completely outclassed. The blow, one of many, hammered home against his defenses. All he could do was block and try not to lose so fast. The only plus side was that this guy wasn't as strong or as fast as Itsuka. He wasn't even scarier than 𝐭 was, but that didn't mean he wasn't scary. Another blow, this one pushing his arm out wide as an open palm slammed into his chest. The wind was knocked out of him as he was forced back, his lungs burning all over again. The world spun. Another blow, once more to his chest, and it stopped. That clarity only lasted for a few brief moments before nausea set. The third blow he barely blocked, pushing it to the side so it grazed his shoulder. He ran away. He needed time to gather himself. There had to be something he could do. His foe had longer reach than him, better technique, more power, greater speed. He wasn't slow and lumbering, nor did he charge blindly. Average in every attribute. No weaknesses. He was already down in points and fatigue. There had to be something. Wait, why wasn't he being charged at, or acted upon aggressively? His opponent was taking small measured steps towards him. The ring. He was at the edge. His opponent was being careful. He didn't want to risk a ring out. Sure, charging him could force him out of the ring, but it could easily backfire. A ring out wouldn't guarantee him the win, but it might earn him enough points to matter. He was in a corner, there was no escape, defeat was inevitable. He couldn't think his way out of this. So, maybe he could just do something stupid. With his head down he charged forward, taking a quick blow to the shoulder and knee to the stomach as his shoulder collided with his opponent's stomach. He might not be much of a fighter, his body might not be that strong, but if there was one thing he had gotten good at these past 7 months, it was lifting heavy and awkward objects. He pushed up with his knees, thankful that the rules allowed for grapples. A scream escaped him as he felt the full weight of his opponent on his shoulder. He twisted, turning that upwards energy into horizontal momentum, and tossed his opponent out of the ring like the countless number of microwaves he had thrown into the back of All Might's truck. His opponent landed on his feet, looked down at the ground and smiled. "Good one. That's the stuff, kid." All Might's booming voice echoed throughout the gymnasium. Now that was really giving it your plus ultra. All eyes turned to the large imposing figure that was All Might in a winter coat, beaming and smiling like it was a photo op. "Hey, is that All Might?" one person said. "What's he doing here? Why's he rooting for that kid? Maybe it's his kid or something." All Might's smile didn't vanish, but his arm fell and he looked around the room as people began to move towards him. What's that?" "A cat stuck in a tree." "Hold on, kitty. I'm coming." Plus ultra. Without waiting a moment, All Might leapt over to the door, clearing several people, and was gone. Did All Might really just use the cat stuck in a tree excuse? Itsuka asked, walking up to nudge him on the shoulder. "Still, good job, Izuku, but next time try to get hit less." He lost a minute into the next round. Itsuka barely lost the finals. 7 exams. Chapter text seriously. Itsuka glanced at her phone one more time, confirming that Izuku had not yet responded to her texts, and that he was going to be late. And if she kept waiting for him, she was going to be late. The entrance exam. That was what they had been training their butts off for this past year. And it was starting in 10 minutes. "Where are you, Izuku?" she paced, turning towards the building, her leg twitching in annoyance. If he made her late, she was going to go extra hard on him the next time they spared. There would be absolutely no mercy for Izuku, especially if he doesn't at least respond to my text. Seriously, it wasn't like he paid attention while he was walking anyways. He was always lost in his own head anyway. He could at least check his damn phone. She growled, turning again, pacing in front of the gate like a dog with a shock collar. Another would-be student jumped when she accidentally glared at her. So much for good first impressions. Testing day and somebody was already scared of her. She took a breath, trying to calm herself, doing the pose that her father had taught her. It almost worked. She was still annoyed, but at least now she was smiling. Seriously, why was it that Izuku being late for the exam was stressing her out more than the actual exam was? Only 1 out of 300 applicants passed. She really should be focusing more on out-of-the-way Deku. A shrill voice that was as stubborn as a donkey and rude as a pig tore through the crowd and drew her eyes towards the entrance. And there he was, Izuku, wearing an overstuffed backpack, staring at UA. With his mouth wide open, his face was covered in sweat and it looked like his hair was still wet. Didn't he live like 40 minutes away? "Kaken," Izuku mumbled, taking a few steps back, fumbling over himself. "Get out of my way or you're dead," the angry blonde kid said in an even tone, glaring straight at the door. "What? A prick. Wait, wasn't he the boy Izuku saved?" "It was, wasn't it?" "Morning." Izuku flailed, trying to get out of his way. "Let's both do you know." She walked forward, stepping in the blonde's way, hands on her hips, one eyebrow raised. "You should be a bit nicer since he did risk his life to try and save you." "I didn't ask him to save me," he growled, glaring at her. His slumped shoulders and forward-facing glower made the 2 inches he had on her vanish. "And who the fuck are you?" "His girlfriend." "Get the fuck out of my way, bitch." "Make me." Was it helpful? If anything, it was the exact opposite of helpful. But her nice mode only extended up until she was called a bitch. And what was with that lame-ass insult attempt of embarrassing her by calling her Izuku's girlfriend? "Wait." Izuku ran over to them, trying to get between them. "Please don't fight." "Itsuka, it's not big deal. That's just how Kaken is. If you two start fighting now, you might get kicked out." She knew Izuku was right, but she had this annoying thing called pride, and an annoying habit of sticking up for people. And Izuku was her friend, so even if he didn't need or want her to, she was going to defend him. "So he's normally an asshole." "Yes," Izuku blurted out, then covered his mouth. "Well, I mean, that is whatever, just stay out of my way," Kaken grunted, stepping to the side to pass her. "And quit calling me Kaken, you damn Deku." She couldn't help but let out a breath when that was all over. She looked at Izuku, who was turning to look between her and that other boy. She was going to call him Kaken just because it bugged him. And it was funny. "What took you so long, Izuku? And what's with the bag?" "Oh." Izuku jumped, focusing on her again. His face was red and he took a step back, shifting his legs like he was practicing his form. "I was finishing up my training. I managed to clear out the beach this morning." "Really? The whole thing?" She clapped her hands and smiled. "That's fantastic, Izuku. I bet it feels good having completed your goal." "Yeah." He lifted his head up, looking her right in the eyes. Had he always been as tall as her? His face was full of pride and he had his fists pumped at his waist. I feel like I actually earned it. And it was thanks to you and Kendo-sensei too. That's so great, Izuku. She clapped him on the back and pointed towards the building. But we really need to hurry, we're about to be late. His pride was replaced by pure terror as the realization that they were the last ones outside washed over him. 40 passing 1 for all to Izuku hit him faster and harder than he expected it to. Less than 3 hours into the day and he already felt like he needed a nap. Maybe a nice cup of tea would perk him up. Shame he couldn't make himself a cup of tea the same way Night Eye could. At least the torch has at long last been passed. Toshinori breathed, running a hand through his hair, all but swimming in his bright yellow suit. Though his body was drained, at the same time his soul was filled with energy. He had found a worthy successor, one that had surpassed his expectations with every turn. Even when his body battered, beaten, and bruised, young Midoriya would stand up, forcing that pathetic smile onto his face and ask for more. He could only hope that he made the right choice. No, that wasn't right. He needed to have faith in Izuku. Coughing into his hand, he assumed the look of All Might, the one that everybody had come to see as a pillar of truth and justice, and stepped out of the private room that Nezu had set up for him. It was a small gesture, but one he was grateful for. At least, the only thing he had to do today was watch his would-be students battle against giant robots. Hopefully Izuku would be able to use one for all by then. But with his advice and Izuku's natural heroic tendencies, there was little to worry about, especially with the hidden requirements. No, there was little to worry about. Besides, it was all in Izuku's hands now. The observation room was dimly lit. One wall covered in numerous security cameras that were set up around the exam course. Numerous buttons and levers were set up around the room to spring traps, trigger opponents, and direct their course. It was a perfect setup to create chaos. There were several pro heroes, government officials, and a few other former students all milled about. Several nodded at him and smiled. Tea. What? He shook his head, looking down to see the smiling face of an almost familiar-looking man offering him a cup of tea. The man, much like himself, was dressed in a pinstripe suit. Though where his was yellow, the other man's was black. A black and white mustache showed his age, while his black hair was pulled back into a ponytail. He almost looked like Eraserhead's father. Tea. The man held the cup up higher, his smile all but swallowing the dull blue of his eyes. I made it fresh, and you certainly look like you needed a cup. Toshinori. His first name. Who was this man? Still, the tea smelled wonderful. Thank you, but I'm afraid I didn't catch your name. Oh, but of course, we haven't spoken to each other in several decades. The man extended his free hand, still smiling that impossibly large smile, like he was trying to have a contest over who had the most ridiculous smile. A contest. He, as the man who smiled in the face of danger, would not lose. I'm Itsuka Kendo. I graduated you 2 years your senior. I think I recall now. He grabbed the man's hand, smiling wider. He almost didn't recognize the man with his hair groomed back, or without the more traditional Japanese outfit he normally wore. This was Izuku's martial arts teacher. Your hurricane strike. What brings you back to UA? Well, when I informed our dear principal that I was in the area and retired, he offered me a spot as a judge. Kotsu's smile didn't so much as budge as he took a small sip of his own tea. And what kind of father would I be to not watch my own daughter's test live in action? Doesn't that mean you're biased? He followed suit. The tea hit his nostrils first, bathing him, a scent that burned with the scent of fall but soothed with a dash of spring and winter. Its texture was smooth and far too light for how much flavor was packed in there into the cup. Strong bitter herbs blended with sweeteners provided a 1-2 punch that seemed to shatter away his weariness, and the aftertaste of mint left him wanting more. Good tea. Better than Night Eye's. I won't be judging my daughter. Kotsu's smile widened into the cup. Besides, I believe we both share a bias for a certain boy with no quirk, do we not? This wasn't good. He should have been more careful. The more people that knew about his involvement with Izuku, the more people All for One could potentially target. He needed to keep this as quiet as possible. Are you referring to young Midoriya? Kotsu brushed his mustache, his hand doing little to hide his nearly maniacal smile. The very same. I must thank you for giving him such brilliant inspiration. I believe that even without a quirk, you could use a boy with his discipline. He laughed, more out of nervousness than any kind of humor. I agree, but I don't believe Izuku is the type of boy that would be happy simply receiving something without earning it, do you? Absolutely. He is more than willing to put in the hard work, and failure doesn't frustrate him. Kotsu nodded, taking another sip and gesturing towards a set of seats. Now then, why don't we have a seat? The exam is about to begin. So much for being able to relax a bit. Certainly, I look forward to seeing what my future students are capable of. 7 exams occurring at once. Dozens of viewing rooms were set up to keep judge and score the thousands of would-be applicants. The entrance exam was as grand as any of UAS tests, but it was by far the most important. They needed to judge those who could be heroes from those who could not. 10 minutes was a harsh time limit, but in the world of heroes, it was the split-second decisions that mattered most. Remember our exams. Kotsu thumbed with one of the controls, causing the cameras to flicker to the gates where the students had gathered. Way back when you were admitted only if you were brave enough to apply, and the rest would be beaten into you. He slapped his own armrests. You're making us sound like an old man, Kotsu. Recovery girl was young back then, and every male student had a crush on her if I remember correctly. His smile faded as his hand moved to a knee, pain twisting on his face as he at long last looked his age. He wasn't wrong, they were both old. But that was a different time when the crime rate was running rampant and being a hero was rarely a choice. Then you showed up. I didn't do it alone. It was thanks to heroes like you constantly having my back that we were able to achieve the peace we have now. He nodded towards the screen, and it will be up to heroes like them to maintain it. So you admit you're getting old too. Even that young punk Endeavor has been outdoing you in terms of crime fighting in recent years. Kotsu's smile returned, hiding his eyes as he shrugged. Still, it's thanks to you that I was able to retire without worry and raise my daughter. Come now, if that old fart Yori can still rank in the top 10, then we have nothing to complain about getting old. He laughed, slapping his knee. The wound from All for One flared up, and he had to fight back a wince. And you're still a spry man. Surely you could have a few more years of hero duty left in you. I have no doubt I could trounce many of these students even without my quirk. Kotsu grabbed his knee again, that smile vanishing once more, revealing the cold blue eyes of a man that had lost much and pushed forward despite it all. It was the same sunken eyes he carried. But when I lost Miu, my knees were also badly damaged. I can't use my quirk without risking them blowing out. My condolences, I wasn't aware she passed. He shouldn't have delved so deep into this conversation. He was bringing up things better left buried. Was she a hero as well? Yes, Titanium Tatiana. And it's all right, though her loss still hurts. I have accepted it. And I have my wonderful daughter. He sighed, looking towards the screen. If something were to happen to me, then that would leave my daughter an orphan. But you are right, there is some fight still left in me. But I'd rather have my final fight matter than have it account for little. Heroes rarely die of old age. You're a bit old-fashioned, aren't you? Kotsu's smile returned, banishing any memory of his frown. No doubt my daughter would agree with you. Keep your eye on her during the test. You'll be impressed. For sure, he nodded, turning his attention back to the screens. By luck, good or bad, Izuku and Itsuka were in separate testing zones. The buzzard sounded, and the gates opened, and the students rushed in. The UA entrance exams had begun. Already the scoreboard's buzzing, numerous students racking up points as their quirks pushed them forward. At the front of the pack was Katsuki Bakugo, already scoring 10 points within the first 15 seconds, and he showed no signs of slowing down. Itsuka was easy to spot, leading her own group in terms of score, both in practical points, and was among the first to start earning rescue points as she blocked a machine from assaulting another girl. That was what they were after, the will to act without hesitation even when it wasn't to one's gain. She certainly has what we're looking for in a hero. Overall, she was constantly in the hotly contested top 10 as the scores continued to change and dance. But among those students, she had the most rescue points. One of the monitors followed her, leaping through the air, her hands enlarged to the size of her body, and crumpling one of the robots like it was made of paper mache. But Izuku, Kotsu commented, shifting the camera to find young Midoriya running around like a chicken with its head cut off, could be putting on a better display. His current points were 0. He hadn't managed to do anything, and time was dwindling away. Could he not use one for all right now? It didn't take him that long. He could use it minutes after Nana gave him her hair. But perhaps Izuku was simply different. What if they didn't do enough training? What if he couldn't take it, so the transfer failed? It's unlike you to fret so much. Kotsu kept his blue eyes locked onto the screen. His smile twisted into a mocking half-grin. Have faith in Izuku, you know the kind of boy he is. Indeed, if I'm not mistaken, it was his very self-sacrificing nature that got you interested in him, was it not? There was no sense in trying not to play favorites here. You're right, I just want him to feel like he earned his place in here. Then, Nezu bounded up to the control station, a smile etched on his animalistic face, round white ears twitching. Let's kick things up a notch and see the true heroes. The exams were thrown into chaos as the giant obstacles began to rage through the stages, many students fleeing from it, others struggling to avoid it. And then there was Katsuki, who appeared to scream and charge at the one in his stage. But their focus, indeed the focus of the whole room, was on Izuku, the boy with 0 points. The robot tore through a building, its massive feet causing a lone girl to trip and fall. She'd be crushed if she didn't do anything. People show their true colors when they face something that's pointless to try and beat. Kotsu beamed, standing in his seat as Izuku began to rush towards the girl. Everybody else had attempted to flee. When there's nothing to be gained, rising to the challenge at those times is surely the mark of a true hero. though. Perhaps charging at a giant robot when he doesn't have a quirk is the sign of he was cut short when out of nowhere Izuku jumped dozen or more stories facing the giant mechanical monstrosity face to face. That green-haired little entertainer that had a reckless flair for the dramatic pulled his arm back, his sleeve tearing as he at last unleashed one for all. The punch was sloppy. Only the basics of martial arts training were instilled in there. But the raw power of it, despite not so much as making direct contact with the robot, managed to reduce it to a pile of scrap. Cheers broke out around the room as Izuku's rescue point skyrocketed, even as he began to fall like a stone. The girl he had saved returned the favor, using her quirk to end his fall. I told you young Midoriya would be fine. He crossed his arms and nodded. He really shouldn't have worried so much. Izuku's body still wasn't completely ready for one for all. But now, they could take the long, slow path of making certain that he becomes a worthy vessel. Toshinori, Kotsu said softly, standing in front of his chair and placing both hands on his shoulders. His eyes were hidden, pointed towards the floor as his arms began to shake. How did you do it? What are you talking about? This was bad. This was really, really bad. If word of his quirk's true nature got out, then it would shake the foundations of their society and cause pain for Izuku. He needed a lie-some excuse. I simply helped to bring out what was inside of Izuku all along. I know. Kotsu looked up, a smile attempting to eat his face that left his blue eyes blazing with passion. I know that. But how did you see it? How did I not see it? To think that my student would have a quirk that could unleash his inner power. This is phenomenal. I need to adjust his training. Wait, I should get him into meditation. Wait, that's a terrible idea. Izuku can barely sit still when he's asleep. His mind worries too much. Oh, there's so much to do. What? He asked, sinking further into his seat. Wasn't he about to be exposed for transferring his quirk to Izuku? Ah, that explains a lot about your quirk as well. It's not just general strength enhancement, you're literally just tapping into your inner power. Kotsu spun, stroking his mustache, a wild gleam in his eyes. Tell me, have you ever considered learning Tai Chi? 8 Chakra Chapter Text. So, Itsuka hummed, hands behind her back as they wandered down a random street she had lured him down. Apparently they were heading towards a park. In February, on the coldest day of the year, there was snow sticking to the ground. She was dressed in a warm-looking brown jacket. A green scarf that matched her eyes was wrapped around her neck, one end falling off her shoulder. She looked adorable. About your quirk. There were many things that threw Izuku off balance at that moment. The softness of Itsuka's smile, the glint in her eye, the fact that she knew about his brand new quirk, or the slick ground he nearly slipped on. Before he hit the ground, something caught him. It was Itsuka. Her hand grown to over the size of his body and pushed him up with ease. Thanks, he muttered, stuttered, stammered, fumbled, and blushed. You're getting fast at using your quirk. She spun, walking backward into the park, her large hiking boots stomping onto the ground with ease. Thanks, but we're not here to talk about your. She stopped, dead in her tracks, her face turning to tilt to the side. Wait a second. What? He held his hands up as she took a few steps closer. Did she figure it out? Itsuka was a smart girl. She might even be one of the smartest people he knew. She got perfect marks on all her exams. There was no way she couldn't have figured out that he got this quirk from All Might. Her still enlarged hand fell on top of both of their heads, squishing down his curly hair and her ponytail. You're as tall as me now, she half pouted. When did that happen? He shrugged, shrinking down as her hand retreated. I don't know, I guess I'm still growing. Like you grew your quirk. She took a step back again, both hands behind her back as she spun, taking first few steps onto the freshly fallen snow. Seriously, I want some answers, Izuku. I'm not mad, just I thought you didn't have a quirk. Okay, good, she didn't figure it out yet. He shrugged again, trying not to look at her right now. A few bits of snow had fallen into her hair. He was used to seeing her covered in sweat, panting, and beaming with self-confidence as she was about to kick his ass again. Sure, they had hung about, just like at the fireworks, but this was very different. It was probably just the fact that he failed the entrance exam and that now he just wasn't going to get into U. It felt like he had let her down. I didn't really know I had a quirk either. I mean, I wasn't lying when I first told you I didn't have a quirk because I didn't know. He half mumbled. Lying to her felt wrong. The exam was the first time I ever used it. His hand fell to his arm, fingers slightly numb from the cold, and I ended up breaking my arm and leg. So a snowball to the face shut him up. Izuku, she laughed, still beaming at him. You're missing the point about this. You have a quirk. You, the boy who was trying to become a hero and get into UA without a quirk, now has a quirk. I'm surprised you're not using every waking moment to try and understand your quirk. I mean, I've seen the 3-page essay you wrote about my quirk. He pushed the snow from his face and tried to glare at her. It really didn't work. Besides, she was kind of right. But just using it broke my arm. So, she raised an eyebrow, already packing another snowball in her hands. I'm not saying you should go out of your way to hurt yourself like that, Izuku. That's the last thing I want. But that was your first time using your quirk, and you probably used it wrong. She stood bouncing the snowball in her hand, arm pulled back like a catapult. He dodged the second one. The first time I used my quirk I was climbing a tree and I got stuck for 2 hours while the fire department and another hero tried to cut me out. Her hot breath turned to steam in the cold winter air as she grabbed another handful. With her now giant hands, a maniac smile was on her face. For 2 days I had to use those giant therapy pencils to write with because I couldn't shrink my hands back down. I also cried a lot because I was worried my hands would be stuck like that forever. She hefted what was a beach ball-sized ball of snow that rested in her palm like it was a basketball. She eyed it, and then him. My point being is that you just don't know how to use your quirk. With a grunt, she launched the snowball up into the air, and then jumped after that and swung her hand like she was spiking a volleyball. He tried to dodge, falling to one side to avoid the projectile. But instead of getting pelted by a deadly ball of ice, he was showered by a sudden blizzard of various chunks and sizes. Are you crazy? Nope, she laughed, hands on her hips. I just don't like seeing you mope around. You haven't been to training since then and my dad keeps mumbling about your new quirk. And you're my friend Izuku. Why can't you be as excited about your quirk as I am? I didn't score any points though. He hadn't managed to tell her that part yet. And I was so busy with my workout and training that I didn't have much time to study, so I probably barely managed to pass the written exam. He held his head, the cold air making his rapid breaths visible. I'm so worried that a snowball, a normal-sized one, shut him up again. Izuku, according to my dad, you punched that giant 𝗵𝗃 that we weren't supposed to fight. Itsuka half laughed, spinning in the snow with her arms out wide. She pointed at herself with 2 giant fingers. Even I ran from that thing. But you not only punched it, you completely obliterated it. You have nothing to worry about. How did you even hear about that? He asked, face scrunching up in the cold. But a smile was twisting onto his face despite his all-consuming worry. And how does your dad know? He didn't tell anybody. It wasn't the kind of thing to brag about. Another student from my school saw you do it. She rubbed her nose, green eyes sparkling at him as her orange hair fluttered in the brisk wind. As for my dad, well, he was a judge. He didn't grade either of us and he doesn't know if we passed or not. She shrugged into a pout with her arms crossed, or if he does, he's being weirdly good at keeping secrets. Oh, that made sense. They allowed him to be a judge with you in the exam. He didn't judge either of us. She waved her normal-sized hand in front of her face. But really, just repeat after me. My name is Izuku Midoriya and I punched a giant robot and won. My name is Izuku Midoriya and I punched a giant robot and won. He half mumbled. His cheeks were burning against the cold. I didn't hear you. Are you really doing this? He held his hands out to the side, looking out around the park. They weren't completely alone. Other kids were enjoying the snow and a few adults were walking the trails. Here, Itsuka snorted, hands on her hips. Do you want to eat a car-sized snowball for lunch? My name is Izuku Midoriya and I punched a giant robot and won. Louder. My name is Izuku Midoriya and I punched a giant robot and won. Good, feel better about yourself. She walked over to him, warming her hands with her breath, the edges of her smile peeping over the edge. I mean, I felt better throwing snowballs at you. A bit. He smiled, brushing a generous handful of snow off of his shoulder. I'm still worried I didn't pass though, and that I wasted yours, Kendo-sensei's, and 𝗬𝗵𝗲 time. Her blue-green eyes narrowed at him and her smile turned wicked from behind her hands. Do I need to get more snow? Nope. He stumbled backward, hands raised in defense. I'm fine now, honest. I'm just cold. Good, because even if you did fail, which you don't know yet, nobody is going to think they wasted their time on you. You're their student, and you're my friend. She pumped her arm, the flex of her muscle hidden under the thick material of her coat. You're also my rival, so now that you have a quirk, you should be more pumped to learning to go all out. Really, why am I the one that's excited about your quirk? Because it wasn't his. Because he let All Might down. Because he failed. Because he couldn't use it. Because he looked at his fist, the one that he had punched that robot with. He couldn't feel it right now. The power of one for all was but a distant echo. The memory was still there. It kind of feels like I'm cheating. She slapped him on the back of his head. Izuku, quirks are cheating. She enlarged her hand to its maximum size and held it in front of them. All I can do is make my hands really big and strong. Another kid from my school can control the wind. My dad can extend his legs at half the speed of sound. There's a hero that can turn into a dragon, and another that's literally Godzilla. There are so many different types of quirks out there that most of them are basically cheating, so it's your cheats against theirs. You've been spending too much time with your dad. Itsuka's face flushed despite the cold and she turned to the side, pouting, arms straight at her side. Well, I live with him. Now come on, if you're done moping around, my hands are cold and I want coffee. Oh, sure. He found it easy to smile and stepped out of her way, letting her take the lead. I think you're kind of right. She snapped her head back to look at him, her orange ponytail bouncing with every step. Only kind of. Fine, I think you're right. He gestured towards the snow-filled poke. But did you bring me out here just to try and cheer me up? I wanted to hang out. She shrugged, leading the way out of the park once more. And I wanted to throw snow at someone. The fresh snow so softly stacked upon one of the cement posts that marked the entrance of the park called to him. It would be so easy to grab a handful and toss it at her. Her back was to him, she wasn't moving fast, and even he could probably hit her with it. There really was no choice. The snow flew from his hand before he even felt its cold bite. The loose clump shattered onto her head and stuck to her hair in thick wet clumps. Itsuka froze, turning towards him, her mouth locked into a shocked smile. She licked her lips, pulling some of the snow free from her hair and looked at it. Then him. He made a terrible mistake. Oh, it's on Izuku. Shortly thereafter he decided that she was right. Quirks were cheating, especially hers in a snowball fight. 𝗵𝘃𝗧𝗏. Itsuka sighed, palming her hot cup of coffee in her hands. The bitter smell assaulting her nose as she waited for it to get just cool enough to drink without burning her throat. There was something so soothing about pure black coffee. It was pure, no sugar, no sweetener, nothing but a direct injection of that caffeine and heat she had grown to love. Izuku walked to her left, lost in thought once again while he nursed his steaming hot cup of boring, bland tea. It was, in theory, the perfect drink for a plain-looking boy like him. Man, she had a weird taste in friends. So, you're going to start coming to practice again, right? She leaned into the side, bumping his elbow before springing back into place. It's kind of boring without you there, and once we get into Yua we might not have time for it anymore. That and my dad is getting antsy without you there. I don't understand how you can be so confident about passing. He mumbled, taking another sip of his drink. Big hand, crush robot good. She took that first sip of her drink. It burned her lips, scorched her tongue and seared her throat before boiling her stomach. It was perfect. And why's your dad getting antsy? Isn't he always antsy? Izuku's face twisted like it always did when he was overthinking something. Wait, I'm getting that mixed up. He normally seems pretty mellow unless he's excited about something. She sighed. That was about right considering her father. Yep, when he saw about your quirk he's been eager to try and help you learn more about it. He's been practicing acupuncture again, so don't let him take you into the back after training. There was a good chance her ever so slightly small fear of needles came from her father. Not that Izuku or anybody else ever needed to know that. How would that help? He held his drink in one hand, looking at the hand he had broken during the exam. I'm not exactly sure how to control my own quirk, or what exactly it is. When I asked him about it, he thought it had something to do with harnessing your inner strength, or a manifestation of your willpower or something. She shrugged. Maybe he thinks it's her Kai, or maybe like Kai in Dragon Ball. She blinked, raising an eyebrow at Izuku. You don't think you can fly, do you? No, but I jump good though. He shrugged, turning the corner towards an apartment complex. It was the road that Izuku lived on, and the one that would guide most of the way back to her own home if she walked. But given the cold, she'd probably head towards the nearest train station. And do you watch anime? That's like the third time you've made in reference to something. She shrugged into another sip. I grew up watching my dad's old anime collections. For something so old they hold up pretty good. Oh, well, I don't really think it's anything like that. Then what do you think it is? She flipped her ponytail over her shoulder once more and looked Izuku in the eyes. He didn't hold her gaze for long, keeping his eyes down and cast towards his feet. It always felt like it 2 steps forward and 1 step back with him. He half mumbled, looking up towards his apartment. I don't really know, it's like I just clench my butt cheeks and my heart screams out for justice, then my arm explodes. Did you really just use butt cheeks to describe your quirk? His face turned a firm red at that and he silenced himself into his own drink. Still, you don't know if you don't try. Maybe your quirk just makes you really hate giant robots. It was only half a joke. Still, I do think it's a bit weird how your quirk didn't activate during that slime villain attack. Or maybe it did and that's what 𝗧𝗵𝗲 saw in you. Have you tried asking him? Oh, Izuku half stumbled around the corner, leading towards his apartment. Well, the thing is Izuku. Inko Midoriya burst out of their apartment, her slippers still on as she rushed down the stairs, a letter firmly in her hand. It's here. A letter from you. Izuku dropped the tea she had paid for on the ground. His mouth followed suit as he extended a shaky hand towards the letter. Both mother and son stared at the letter like it was some kind of dark secret, neither one of them willing to budge from their current position. It would have been good manners to excuse herself. But at this point, she wanted to know too. Instead of just staring at it, why don't we go inside and find out what it says? Oh, Itsuka. Of course. Please, come in. Ms. Midoriya spun on her feet and grabbed Izuku by the arm, pulling him up the stairs. Come on, Izuku. We have a guest. Come on in, Itsuka. Make yourself at home. This was the problem with going to Izuku's home. It always felt like it was a bigger deal than it should be. Still, Inko was a nice mother. It was probably just where Izuku got his nervousness from. She'd only been to Izuku's apartment a handful of times, but this was the first time she had actually been inside of it. It was plain, a bit like Izuku, with the sole exception of Izuku's room that at a glance looked to be all might inspire. Ew, Itsuka, can you wait, out here? Izuku fiddled with the letter with both hands, shuffling towards his room. I'd like to read it myself first. Sure, she shrugged, sitting down on the couch. Just read fast, 'cause I wanna know too. It might even have your class assignment. He didn't say much, just waving before vanishing into his room. At least he didn't look like the nervous wreck his was this morning. Oh, dear, Inko mumbled, passing in front of Izuku's door, hanging close to it. She then looked towards her and jumped like she had forgotten she was even there. Oh, Itsuka dear, would you like some tea or something? No thanks, Mrs. Midoriya. She held up her still warm coffee and smiled. I'm good, I still have my coffee. Oh, well, okay then. The woman walked over to her and paced in front of the couch, holding a tray against her chest. Oh, I'm so nervous. Izuku hasn't told me anything about his exam. What if he doesn't get in? What if he does? Oh, he's not ready for this. I don't even know why he took that practical exam. He's a smart boy. He could have gotten in via academics. I know his quirk manifested out of nowhere, but really. What do you think, dear? She nearly coughed into coffee cup, her cheeks burning at the sudden question. I think he'll get in. She righted herself and smiled. He's worked hard for this, probably harder than anybody at the exam. I think that he's earned his way in, and that he'll become a great hero. As soon as he stops, her phone buzzed loudly in her pocket, mumbling all the time. She finished, digging into her coat pocket. It was from one of the two people that texted her. Her father, apparently. She smiled, leaning back into the couch and taking a victory sip. I need to have a talk with my dad about going through my mail. Another sip. She savored that taste of victory humming in her seat. And I got accepted. I'm in class 1BO. Congratulations, yeah. The victory shout from Izuku's room almost shook the building as Izuku came storming out of his room. Tears stained his eyes and his weak, flimsy smile was on his face. I made it. That deserved another victory sip. 40 sometimes, actually pretty much daily for the past year, Izuku found himself asking how he got to this spot in life. This time, he was currently shirtless, in pretty much his underwear, firmly secured to a table by a heavy, still wet, towel in the back of the dojo. A small bit of incense wavered in front of him, filling his nostrils with a scent that was more unusual than unpleasant. Kendo-sensei, he asked, for what felt like the 100th time. Or maybe that was the number of times he should have asked. What exactly are we doing? Kendo-sensei passed in front of him for just a moment. Several sharp needles in his hand and a smile that belonged on a villain was plastered on the man's face. His formerly stark black hair now had a few strands of gray that stuck out like a sore thumb. An experiment. What kind of experiment? One based on your quirk. The man placed a warm thumb down into the center of his back. There was a snap and a pop, and it felt like all the stress had simply left his body. It was like someone has picked him up by the neck and cracked him like a whip, separating every single one of his joints and allowing him to finally relax. You see, I have a theory. The reason why your quirk caused you damage was that it was frustrated. Your body didn't know what to do with it, so it held back and damaged itself. Like a hiccup. A hiccup. He half repeated, still halfway melting into his new, more relaxed body. He should have gotten a massage years ago. Correct. Technically speaking, a hiccup is just a frustrated burp that's been trapped. So today, I'm going to see if I can untrap your Kai, or whatever you want to call it, see what happens. That sounds. He drifted off. Then reality snapped back to him. That sounded dangerous. What was he doing? If he used one for all here, then it could seriously hurt someone. Wait, too late. There was a small prick in his back. His eye twitched. His arm spasmed. His finger flicked. A blast of wind knocked the table over and the cold winter air came flooding into the room at the new hole that had been opened up thanks to one for all being activated. He looked towards his finger. It wasn't damaged. Why? Perhaps we should have done this outside. Kendo-sensei's voice sounded from above him. He was pressed to the ceiling, his legs extended to both walls to keep him pinned up there. Still, that was quite the result. What the hell are you? Itsuka came running into the room but came to a dead stop when she looked at him. Her mouth fell open, eyes growing wide as she got an eyeful of him nearly naked. Her face turned a shade of red darker than her hair before she spun on her heel without another word. I wonder if she's mad. Kendo-sensei snickered from the ceiling. As for him, he was fairly certain he could die of embarrassment now. 9th Kata chapter text UA. Was everything she had imagined it was and more so. The staff was brimming with pro heroes. The classes filled with kids like her that had their hearts set on becoming pros and the skill, drive, and knowledge to back them up. It was so unlike anything she had experienced in middle school. Sure, there were a few students back then that wanted to become a hero, but they seemed less serious about it than she was. There were just two things that could make you just that little bit better. The first was a selfish desire to be in the same class as Izuku. Sadly, they were, with him being in class 1A while she was in class 1B. But she still had every chance to see him during lunch, and they could easily take a train ride home, which was only ever so slightly awkward when she thought about how much he had matured in the year she had known him, especially on the forearm and muscle categories. The second problem was Clearly, you have forgotten that I come from the prestigious Namanaka school. Monoma, her loud, ever so annoying classmate spoke from the podium beside her. It was the second week of school. and they were just now selecting who would become the class president. Debate style. I have had leadership responsibilities in the past. Additionally, thanks to my quirk, I will be able to assist you all in better understanding your own quirks through my unique skill set. If you want to have the superior candidate for class president, vote for me. 𝗵𝗲. He had been talking non-stop for the past 15 minutes. He was rambling, loudly, about how he was the superior candidate, and even going so far as to take up her time for making her case for becoming the student president. And their teacher, the hero Vlad King, 𝐒𝐭𝐲 𝐷, sat in the back, arms crossed, looking onward with a frown that made him look like a bulldog. He had left this matter up to them alone and would only step in if they took too long, which 𝗵𝗲 was currently devouring. Indeed, if I am elected, she hit him on the back of the neck, her quirk partially activated. He slumped forward, all the steam gone from him as she held him up by his shirt collar. He wasn't knocked out or anything, just kind of stunned. It was probably uncalled for and it bad taste, but it was I vote for Itsuka. One of her fellow students, a plain-looking girl with black hair that fell to her chin, stood from her seat. It was 𝐒𝐽𝐫, one of the few girls in her class. Her quirk lets her change the size of objects. Others began to stand as well, and soon over half the class had stood voting her in as class president. She didn't even say a single word. 40 class president. He was the class president. How did this happen? Why? When? What was he supposed to do? He understood the importance of the role and that he did want to be it, that he should want to be it. But the stress was already getting to him. He stared at his partially eaten plate of food, just letting the reality of the situation sink in. Nope, wasn't sinking in. Was All Might his class president? It was a leadership role and would set him apart from his peers, but what was he supposed to do? He could barely even talk to Momo, the vice president, without stuttering. A tray slammed down in front of him, shocking him out of his thoughts. His fingers, still sore from the quirk test yesterday, bent awkwardly when he brought his hands down. Guess who's the class president of 1B? Itsuka smiled at him, her orange hair hanging in front of one of her shoulders, and a large toothy smile dominated her face. Beside her stood another girl, one with black hair and a serious look on her face. Oh, and this is Yui Kodai, she's from my class. Yui, this is Izuku, my friend from my dad's dojo. Hi. The girl nodded, sitting down at his table. She blinked at him, turning her head sideways before picking at her food. Oh, hello. This was the first time he'd seen someone from Class 1B that wasn't Itsuka, though he'd heard of how annoying 𝗵𝗲 was. Wait, you're the class president too? Yeah. Itsuka stared at him, her green eyes boring into him as the slender orange arch of her eyebrow rose. He'd never tell her, but while she looked cute in her middle school uniform, her UA uniform made her even cuter. She pointed her unbroken set of chopsticks at him. You're the class president too? He gave a small nod, head slinking down into his shoulders. Somehow, he poked at his food again. I ended up getting 3 votes. And that was enough? Itsuka questioned. I got over half the class to vote for me. She hit 𝗵𝗲. Yui spoke up, the slightest hint of a smile on her face. Ah, the loud guy. Yui nodded. Yep. Itsuka's face flushed in a rare act of embarrassment. He wouldn't stop talking. I'm not a violent person. Izuku. The chipper voice of one of his classmates pulled him out from drew his eyes away from Itsuka. It was 𝗬𝗏, the second girl he managed to talk to for more than 2 syllables. She beamed at the table, her round cheeks stretched by her smile, her brown hair bouncing with her every step. Oh, is this that girl you keep talking about? She slid into the seat next to him, looking right at Itsuka. The one that showed you those awesome kung fu moves you used to beat Katsuki? And the orange hair? Itsuka or something? You talk about me. Itsuka's smile turned wry as she looked at 𝗬𝗏. Nice to meet you, I'm Itsuka. Now it was his turn to blush. Wait, he was always doing that. I mean, I don't really, but I do. It's just that when they asked about how I learned things, and how I was able to, I wish I could have seen it. 𝗬𝗏 hummed, taking a bite of her rice. But one of the cameras showed Izuku throwing Katsuki into the wall without using his quirk. It really pissed Katsuki off, which is okay because he's kind of a jerk. Oh, I'm 𝗬𝗏, by the way. Nice to meet you. This is Yui. Itsuka gestured towards her quiet classmate, before turning towards him, a withering smirk on her face that had him squirming. She was so going to give him hell about this the next time they went to training. And you didn't tell me you beat that jerk up. I like her already. 𝗬𝗏 beamed, grinning ear to ear. Yes, another plate was placed down next to him. It was quite the show, and the finish took me off guard as well. Ida sat down next to him, a fist clutched at his side, and he looked ready to give an epic speech, but that was just Ida in a nutshell. You truly are the better class president candidate. Not only did you see through the entrance exam, but you also managed to use Katsuki's unpredictable nature in our clash to your advantage. Wait, what did he see through in the entrance exam? Itsuka perked, pushing her orange ponytail behind her shoulder as she blew on a bite of her food. Because he was freaking out for like 2 weeks straight that he failed it. Despite the fact that he punched a giant robot. Ida's face fell. Wait, you mean he didn't know that there would be rescue points? He slunk down into his seat. He didn't know Ada thought so highly of him, and now all that respect was going to vanish. Nope. Itsuka plopped a bite into her mouth, wiggling her eyebrows at him. He didn't, not at all. And his fight with the alarm blared. Security level 3 has been broken. A calm robotic female voice sounded from the speakers. All students, please evacuate in an orderly fashion. Panic erupted in the cafeteria. Students heading towards one of the 2 exits in a horde, congesting the system in a way that could not be considered orderly. They shoved, bashed, and pushed their way forward, desperate to get out into safety. What's going on? Itsuka asked. Somehow she managed to stick near him in the rush. The quiet girl Yui was there too, her expression largely unchanged. Is this a drill? I don't remember reading about security level 3. I don't think it's a drill, he said as another student pushed him into her. He touched something soft for half a second before standing back up. Sorry, it's okay, she replied quickly, her face growing redder by the second. We should let the crowd disperse before we try to go any further. A panic like this is no good. Agreed, Yui nodded, turning to look out the window. She blinked a few seconds before looking back at Itsuka. It's the press. It was. Weren't they've been at the front gate for a while trying to get an interview from 𝐼𝐺𝐿. Still, if that was the cause of everything, then everyone. Ada slammed into the wall above one of the exit signs, drawing all eyes towards him. Everything's fine. It's just the press. There's nothing to panic about. We're fine. If you spoke up sooner, you could have been a hero. Itsuka patted her friend on the back. No thanks. He stared at Ada for a few moments, relief washing over him as he realized something. Ada would make a much better class president than he would. 40 so. How's it going, Mr. Class President of 1A? She asked, sliding down onto the seat next to Izuku, smiling at his still ever so slightly nervous demeanor. It was good that Izuku was well liked in his class, and it looked like he actually had a few friends. Still, it would have been nice to be in the same class as him. Izuku gave half a jump, perking up from his seat on the train. The sea dominated the horizon, bathed orange by the setting sun, as a few buildings zoomed past them. Well, the thing is, I ended up giving the position over to Ada. What? The glasses guy that calmed the crowd during lunch. Really? I mean, I get why, but just, like, why? He shrugged, moving his bag between his legs, allowing an empty space between them to linger. Obvious, waiting to be filled. Seriously, what was she thinking? She wasn't interested in Izuku like that. Not one bit. They were just friends. She was just still in shock over how muscular he had become. Well, I think that he'd be a good class president is all. Better than me anyway. Really, Izuku? She swatted him in the arm. I don't get you. You push yourself hard enough to make a quirk appear out of nowhere. You train like a madman, and you're a nice guy. Give yourself a bit of credit. You would have been a great class president. It was easy to make him blush after a few compliments. Thanks. An uneasy smile fell on Izuku's face. I was happy when I was elected class president, but then I also quickly realized I just didn't want the position. I'm not really a good leader. Responsible people that can talk in front of crowds like you or Ada are much better for the job. Well, whatever, I still think you would have done great at the job. Somehow that small gap that Izuku had made had been filled. There was less than an arm's width between them. If either one of them moved their legs, moved their arms, made any kind of movement, they'd be touching. Not that it mattered. There was no reason for it to matter. She'd touched Izuku plenty. In a fight or training. But not in public. Seriously, what the hell was wrong with her? Sticking her tongue out, she relaxed into her seat. She needed to get her mind off whatever the hell this was. She wanted to know. So, what's with that girl? The one with the round face. Achako. What about her? He sat up straight in his seat, face going beet red as he stuttered rapidly. Oh, this was going to be so fun to tease. Well, I get that she's your classmate and that she was your partner for whatever exercise you did. Opening gambit, test defenses. But she seems friendly enough. Remove defenses. You don't have a crush on her, do you? Crushing blow. Izuku stuttered, sputtered, and spasmed, his face somehow growing even redder as a building blocked the light from the sun. I wouldn't say that. She's just a classmate and the girl that I ended up saving in the exam, and then we were partners. That's not to say she isn't a cute girl, but we've only known each other for a week and we're classmates, and why did that reaction make her feel so? Bleh. Relax, Izuku. She forced a smile, looking out over the sea once more. I was just joking. I'm just happy you're surviving a class with that jerk in it. Oh, Izuku took a few breaths, his green eyes falling to the ground for a moment. The freckles on his cheeks drew her attention. Had they always been there? Yes, but why was she just now noticing them? They were really hard to look away from. He met her eyes. He caught her staring. How long had she been doing that? Her cheeks felt red. Why did her cheeks feel red? What on earth was happening to her? She looked at her shoes. Well, how about you? How are you surviving your class? They made you the president, right? Izuku asked. He didn't ask about why she was staring at him. That girl Yui seemed nice. She's a bit quiet. She didn't have to force a smile as she turned to look at Izuku once more, eye to eye. She's actually the vice president, probably because she was the first person to vote for me after I, hit Monoma to shut him up. I never did take you for the violent type. Shut up. Now she had a reason to blush. I normally don't like to hit people, but it just seemed like the right thing to do at the time. He just kept talking loudly. I'm surprised you didn't hear him in your room. I mean, he's kind of a nice guy and his quirk is neat, but really, Izuku placed a hand over his mouth like he was a gossiping old woman. Do you have a crush on Monoma? She fake gagged. Don't make me puke. He is so not my type. You have a type. Yes, it's him. Izuku, the boy sitting right next to her. Oh, she had a crush on Izuku. Fuck. I mean, no, I don't really have a type. I'm just focused on being a hero is all. I'm just joking, Itsuka. Payback for earlier. He stuck his tongue out at her. Oh, I'm so going to kick your ass if we spar tonight. As soon as she figured out what the hell she was supposed to do with this crush. Fuck. 10th challenge chapter text. Okay, she had a crush on Izuku. That was fine, that was normal. It basically just meant that she had a crush on her best friend. That was perfectly normal and something that happened every day, which meant that there was only one thing she had to do. Slam her face into her pillow and scream, kicking her legs while she tried to simply remove these feelings. She never had a crush. She never had anybody have a crush on her before. She didn't study for this. She had no idea what she was supposed to do. Was she just supposed to tell him that she had feelings for him? What if he did too? What if he didn't? What if he did, then they started and she lost interest in him? What if that happened to her? What if she never said anything and they just stayed whatever the hell they were now and everything just stayed the same as they tried to become heroes and not actually die? They didn't really need it. They wanted to be heroes. That was their goal. But was she okay with that? With things just staying as they are? What happens if they start dating? What happens if things get serious? What happens if things go even further than that? Seriously, how the heck did all this happen? Why was he the first boy she liked? Sure, a few boys had tried to ask her out, but they were easy to ignore because they just weren't. They weren't Izuku. Okay, maybe if she calmed down and thought about how all this happened, she'd be able to stop it. She'd be able to calm down long enough to completely forget about these feelings that she had for Izuku. Okay, she could do this. She met him a year ago. They became friends quickly. He was a harder worker. She didn't believe in him at first. Then he proved her wrong and things began to change. He started working even harder, working himself to the point of exhaustion. And somewhere along the way, he had gone from a scrawny boy that weighed 100 pounds soaking wet to a beefcake with a cute face. And she started to think of him as more than a friend. And this was so not helping. With her face growing hotter by the second, she sat up, grabbing her pillow and screaming in it again. A knock came from her open door and her father stood in the doorway. Well, now she was just going to die of embarrassment. There was a good chance that he would be completely less than helpful. He'd probably just make things worse. I don't exactly speak teenage girl, her dad said, squinting into her room. The dish he had been scrubbing still in his hands. Half the time I could barely figure out what your mother was saying. So, would you mind telling me what 2 screams into the pillow means? It's nothing, she half muttered, turning to look at the phone she had tossed to the side. There were no messages waiting for her. And even if there were, they'd probably just be from Izuku, which was what she wanted most and wanted least, all in one carefully wrapped package. Her father didn't stop and continued into her room, looking around it with care and adoration like it was some sacred place he was treading. It doesn't sound like nothing. She blew a tuft of her hair out of her face and rubbed her skirt, even sitting on the bed so that her legs hit the floor. A sigh later and she forced a smile onto her face. It's nothing really, it's just, she just had a crush on Izuku and was currently having a meltdown over the fact that she could have romantic feelings, let alone that she had said feelings for her best friend. Just stressing about something that happened at school. It's only been like a week. He sat down on her bed at the corner, placing the dish and rag he had walked in with on the table. He squinted at her. Only the slightest glimmer of his blue eyes shone, like he was trying to gain some insight into her mind. A soft fatherly frown on his face. Is this about the press breaking in? What? No, I actually forgot about that. Between becoming class president and realizing she had a crush on Izuku. And actually that's it. Oh ho ho. Her father's smile came back and he grabbed her shoulder, pulling her into an awkward hug. Your first year and you're already a leader among your peers. Congratulations. Maybe I should call them Midoriyas and set up. No, it's fine. She shook him off by rolling his shoulders. Besides, Izuku was also voted class president, but he gave it to another student, so it'd be weird to celebrate like that. And she probably wouldn't be able to look at Izuku right now without blushing up a storm. Just thinking about him was making her cheeks warm. Oh, well, that's a shame. I guess I'll have to cook tonight after all. Her father laughed, and then sighed, his wrinkles growing more prominent, and it almost looked as though those few gray hairs in his hair were multiplying. I'm proud of you, no matter what happens. Your mother would be too. She bit her lip, staring out the hallway, trying to picture the place where they kept her mother's photo. She had more memories of that photo than she did about her as a person. That seemed so long ago. How did you and Mom meet? Like the whole story and how you fell in love. Oh my, finally interested in that are you? Her father leaned back, resting on one arm while brushing his mustache that was at least 2 generations away from being fashionable. Well, as you know, your mother was quite a bit younger than me. When we first met, it was during her work-study program from you, and naturally I had seen her performance at the sports festival and thought that she would fit in with my agency. She was a strong-willed woman even back then. In a way, I guess I should have seen it coming that I would grow to love her. She certainly did. I remember her bossing you around a lot. She leaned forward, smiling. It was one of the few memories she had of her mother. He sighed, smiling fondly. I got a lot of shit from my fellows about how I was flirting with a high schooler back then, but I really didn't see it like that. We worked well together. I could rely on her and she could rely on me. I guess she thought the same way because every year she back to my office for her work study. And then she joined up full-time once she graduated, right? Yep, I didn't think anything of it. I was just happy she was around and I could start relying on her full-time instead of just a few weeks out of the year. Her father laughed, his nose crinkling as he fought back a small sniffle. She had different plans, and after 2 years of waiting for me to realize I was in love with her, she kind of forced it out of me. And we were married soon after. He pushed onto her nose. And then you came not long after that. So it took you a while to realize you loved her? She asked, swatting his finger away. A bit. I think part of me knew, but I didn't want to admit it because she was so much younger than me. He laughed, slapping his knees as he stood up. That, and I was quite oblivious to her own feelings back then. She had to pull them out of me. But once she did, I couldn't really look back. He sighed, heading towards the door. Thanks for listening to me ramble about your mom for a little bit. I see so much of her in you. From your red hair to your headstrong determination, I know that she would be proud of the woman you're becoming. He smiled again, tapping on her door frame. Just like I am. Thanks, Dad. She smiled, kicking on the side of her bed and rocking ever so slightly back. Consider the teenager daughter emergency averted. Ha, he laughed, hand sliding out of sight. I doubt that, but I'm always willing to talk, even when it's just nothing. Her room grew silent again, leaving her to stew over what he had just told her. For at least 2 seconds before her phone vibrated with a message from Izuku. She fumbled over herself, grabbing at the phone and staring at it for a few seconds. How fast was too fast to respond back? How fast was too fast to look at it? How long was too long? Was there a rule book for this? Or something that she could reference for this? 2 minutes? 5 minutes? What if Izuku felt the same way and that this was his confession text? Was it wrong to confess to someone over text? Shit, she half muttered, her fat finger opening the message. It was one word, hey. She let out a groan, half collapsing down onto her bed. Why was she worrying so much about a stupid text? This wasn't like her. Tomorrow she'd just ignore her feelings and pretend that everything was perfectly normal between her and Izuku. She glanced over at her table. The dish and rag her father had brought in were still on her table. Dad, 40, she could do this. She was a strong hero in training. She could fight bad guys, even ones that turned into giant monsters. Talking to her crush should be easy. Hell, she'd done it almost daily for a year now before she knew he was her crush. It was just Izuku. She could talk to Izuku. She had absolutely no reason to worry about anything whatsoever. Hey, Itsuka, he said from behind her, his lunch tray in one hand, smiling widely at her and acting like they were best friends. Wait, they were. She stared at him for all of 3 seconds. Whatever he was saying was falling on deaf ears. Sorry, Izuku. Gotta go. She grabbed onto Yui's wrist, pulling the aloof girl along with her as she made a quick escape out of the cafeteria. Student council stuff. We do? Yui asked as she continued to drag the poor girl. She didn't bother answering as they eventually ended up in one of the secluded areas of the school, where the gardeners had some fun to make a scenic place to simply rest, complete with a pond and a bench. She didn't even know how she found this place, let alone what to do with herself. Is this where the student council stuff is? Yui huffed, her cheeks red from exertion and her hands were empty. Oh no, I'm sorry, Yui. I pulled you without thinking. We can share my lunch if you want. She held up her tray of food that was now a mess. It was only half full before she ran anyways. Don't worry. Yui nodded, opening her palm to reveal a miniature lunch tray sitting in the center. It expanded in size instantly. Yui plopped down onto the bench, picking at a bit of her food with her fingers. I managed to shrink it down. But why'd we run? Oh, well, the thing is, she stammered, her face growing even hotter by the second. Then she let out a sigh and sat down next to Yui. I don't know. I just saw Izuku and freaked out. Yui blinked, her monotone voice muffled by the food in her mouth. Isn't he your friend? A sadistic smile gracing the plain girl's face for a few seconds. He didn't awkwardly confess, did he? No, she whined, head in her hands. Kind of. Not really. I mean, he didn't really do anything, I just kind of. So you have a crush on him? What? She half screamed, her heart beating faster and faster. Oh God, was she that obvious? She took a breath, calming herself, and lowered her voice. I mean, what makes you think that? Well, Yui held up 4 fingers on her hand. You're always happy when he's around, and you smile a lot. She pushed down one finger. You talk about him a lot. Another finger. When he surprised you, you ran away pulling me out here. One last finger. Your face is red right now and you screeched when I suggested it. The last finger was folded into her hand, and Yui turned to blink at her. Does that cover it? Yeah, she whined, slinking down onto the bench. Was I that obvious? I think the whole school knows after what you just did. Yui shrugged. Thanks, I guess I'll have to transfer schools now. Yep, your school life is over now. Gee, thanks. She sat up straight, sighing. That really makes me feel great about the whole not freaking out thing I'm trying to do. You're welcome. Yui continued to munch on her food. She whined, stomping her feet on the ground, ready to pull the orange hair out from her head. What should I do? What if he figures it out too? Yui shrugged. I'll say we were at a meeting with 𝗏𝗏 if it helps. Thanks, Yui, I'm glad I can rely on you. She took the first bite of her food. It tasted a bit like regret. I guess I'll have to figure out what to do with my feelings, huh? Yui just shrugged. She probably reached her maximum word limit for the day. 40. News of the attack spread like wildfire through the school. Her earlier awkwardness in the cafeteria was nothing but a distant memory. A group of villains had launched a surprise attack on Class 1 while they were doing rescue exercises, and they had managed to fight them off long enough for All Might and the rest of the pro heroes to arrive and save the day. She wanted nothing more than to go check on Izuku, to make sure that he was okay. But she had a responsibility. 𝗏𝗏 had put his trust in her. Please, she begged, hands stretched to the maximum as she blocked the door. Return to your seats. I know it's bad, but what? You're crazy, Itsuka, one of her fellow classmates shouted. We should go with them. We could get in the way. She stomped her foot, glaring at the boy. If we show up, that's more students in danger. If someone goes missing while we're trying to go help, that's more stress for our teachers. We need to stay where they know we are. Believe me. She glared at them, holding up a single normal-sized fist, her other shaking at her side. I want to go out there and help too. I want to know that everybody is okay. But right now, the best thing we can do is wait, and not get in any more trouble. If you have a problem with that, then you'll have to try going through me. She dropped into her combat pose, and then explained to 𝗏𝗏 why you go a bloody nose when you weren't anywhere near the combat zone. The responsible students, the ones that were on her side, nodded and stood beside her. Bit by bit, the disgruntled students that wanted to prove themselves sat back down, which gave her enough breathing room to start worrying her head off about Izuku. So far, he hadn't responded to the one text she managed to send him. 11th hour chapter text Dad. Itsuka called, running up the stairs. There was only so much time she could spend with Izuku alone before her heart got the better of her. Having a crush sucked. She didn't know what to say, what to do, how to act, or what to talk about it. Sure, when she actually started talking to Izuku, it was easy as it ever was, but the silences between them grated at her nerves. She was never one to just stand around and do nothing anyways. She needed to do something, and that something was train. The villain attack yesterday had told her that much, and she'd tell him the truth. How she really felt about him if she won in the sports festival, or if he won. That way it was less an excuse to not do it. Because it wasn't an excuse, she just needed to focus on becoming a good hero first. Then she shook her head and slapped her cheek. She continued into their home to see her father glaring at the TV, both hands balled into fists at his sides and a scowl on his face. Late last night, the villain known as 𝗏𝗏𝗏 escaped from prison. It is still unknown if this is related to the attack on you. The reporter spoke. Dad, she shouted again. He jumped a bit, his fists, or rather his entire body, relaxed, and he smiled at her, but there was something off about it, like he wasn't all there. Oh, Itsuka, is Izuku here? Yeah, she pointed down the stairs. He's downstairs getting into his training uniform. Are you okay? Did you know that villain? Oh, he turned toward the TV. Once more. Yes, he's one of the villains that your mother and I took out. He paused, brushing his beard as he turned back to look at her. But that is enough living in the past for 1 week. Let's go train you and Izuku for your futures. His smile turned dark, barely hidden by his hand. And try not to hate me after today's training. Yay, sure, she rolled her eyes, heading back downstairs. You need to lay off the old kung fu moves, Dad. Why? They're good. 40 focus. Kendo-sensei's voice drifted throughout the darkness, drawing him deeper into the lull of the exercise. It was unlike anything he had ever attempted or anything he had ever done. But it was so simple. It was to move as slow as possible, but move all the same. Keep your breath even. Find that source. Find your power, your inner strength. He breathed, keeping his eyes closed, shifting his foot from the warm stop he had made on the dojo floor to a crisp area that was still tempered by the early morning chills of May. His arm still burned from the injury he received yesterday, the self-inflicted one, but once more he was trying to use one for all. A breath, a pause. There, he felt it. For just a second. before it rolled away as though simply angered that it had been woken up for something unimportant. He followed it, chasing it deeper and finding it and grabbing onto it with both hands. That familiar jolt ran through his body, pushing at his every nerve and trying to force him to move. It was a call to action, like his body wanted to move all on its own. But that wasn't about this. This was different. He needed to stay still. Good, you have it, don't you? Kendo-sensei half muttered, guiding his arm into the correct with a gentle hand. Where do you have it? My stomach. That's good. That's very good. Now, try to move it. Gather it in your hands. Send it from fingertip to fingertip, hand to hand. No middle ground, like you're juggling. He tried that. But the energy, one for all, didn't work like that. It was either there or it wasn't. There was no moving it. But he could control where it was. His arm was easiest, his hand a bit harder, and his fingers were difficult. It doesn't work like that. It's kind of like a light switch, he said softly, opening up his eyes to stare at his hand. He could still see it in his hand right where he left it on. But then it faded almost instantly. I can turn it on in each room, but I can't have it follow me. His eyes found Itsuka. Her face was laced with sweet, orange hair tied in a ponytail, while she was dressed in her usual black workout clothes. She met his gaze before turning away, nuzzling on her water bottle, her face red, probably from her earlier training with her own quirk. Well, Kendo-sensei shrugged, holding his arms up. We'll just have to try, and once you have more control over your quirk. So keep practicing, and I'm sure you'll think of something. Kendo-sensei ran a hand through his hair, pushing his head down, and smiled at Itsuka. The sports festival is soon, if I remember correctly. It's in 2 weeks. Itsuka stood up. Vlad-sensei said that we should be giving it our all and try to train. It's our best chance to get noticed by pros. Oh, is that what it's for nowadays? Kendo-sensei popped his shoulder and rolled his neck. Regardless, it's the most watched event in Japan, and while I'm certain that your senseis at Ua will have their own training or instructions for you. He popped his neck again, performed a few more stretches, his smile growing all the wider. But seeing as how classes have been cancelled thanks to some hooligans, that duty falls to me, at least for today. And what are you going to teach us? He asked, all but bouncing on his feet as Itsuka stood next to him, one arm clutching her elbow. Was she avoiding him? She kept looking away whenever he looked at her. Itsuka, she turned to look at him, holding his gaze so firmly that he almost had to look away. When she had that fire in her eyes and that smile on her face, that was when she was the prettiest. Izuku, for the sports festival, I want to meet you in the final round. Are you sure? He nodded. She held out her arm, fist clenched in above her head. And then, don't expect me to go easy on you. I'm going to beat you for sure. Oh, he crossed arms with her and nodded. I'm not going to lose either. That's the spark I want to see. Kendo-sensei bounced in place, her whole body looking incredibly limber. But now that you have the desire to win, let's see how you deal with suffering defeat. He dropped down into a fighting stance, both hands extending in front of him, a single leg supporting all of his body weight while the other was coiled up like a snake. Over and over again. Today's lesson is getting your ass kicked. Wait, you want us to fight you? Itsuka blanched. Her early bravado was all but gone. What about your knees? Oh please. Kendo-sensei waved his hand and rolled his cold blue eyes. His usual warm smile was replaced by a menacing one. You two won't be enough to make my knees hurt any more than a set of stairs. Now come at me. Itsuka, you can use your quirk freely. Izuku, not inside? Got it. Right then. Kendo-sensei raised his knee so it was level with his chest. On a count of 3, prepared to get your ass kicked. Oh, and Itsuka, this does not count as child abuse, as long as you don't call it elderly abuse, old man. Itsuka taunted, dropping down into her own fighting stance. Come on, Izuku, let's show my dad what we can do. Right. 3, 2, 1. Itsuka ran forward, her hands growing to their maximum size in a hurry. He joined her, careful not to use one for all against his sensei. Adrenaline pumping through him. His first fight with a pro hero, even one that was retired. How could he not be excited? Kotsu fell backward onto his hands, his feet pointed at each of them. 2 loaded guns. He barely had enough time to dodge out of the way before a foot shot past him. The rush of air was enough to rustle his hair and force him to blink. Too slow, he heard from up ahead. He opened his eyes and saw Kendo-sensei's beaming face for a half second. His arms extended down below him as he shot past at knee height. Sensei grabbed a hold of his knee and Itsuka's and pulled them up. The next thing he knew, he was on his stomach looking at where Kendo-sensei was. Get back up. The ass-kicking has only just begun. If you want to make it far as a hero, you must learn to use your quirk beyond its maximum potential. He turned to see Kendo-sensei standing where he and Itsuka had been moments ago. To overcome your own limitations and make your weaknesses your strengths. That is what we must strive for. Is it just me, or does your dad look extra happy? He looked towards Itsuka as he pushed himself up off the ground. I think he's just happy he gets to spout more bullshit. 40. The day of the sports festival was on par of a national holiday. Largely because of the number of people that requested the day off, many businesses simply closed down for the day. It was for that reason that she was able to get the day off so easily. It was going to be a nice relaxing day of watching Izuku do his best at the sports festival while she had at least 20 heart attacks. Okay, chips, do they like chips? I don't know if they like chips. He does like tea, and he is certainly polite. Inko paced the living room of her own modest home. All things considered, it was hardly the place that should be having any form of guests over. But somehow that's what happened. Oh, I'm not the entertainer I used to be. I don't even know why I agreed. Still, the table was set and her nerves were a complete mess. Well, they were always a mess. Oh, if only her husband was here, then maybe she'd be less of a mess. Up next we have the first year events. The TV boomed. But as you can see, security around the area has been heightened after the incident 2 weeks ago. The camera zoomed in on a few police forces and heroes that had been set up around the event. There certainly were a lot of them. At least her Izuku would be safe and sound. A knock came from her door, just a single tap followed by the ring of her doorbell. One moment, she called, hopping over to open the door. It was too late now. It had been far too long since she had actually seen the woman. But they were still friend right. Sure, their children were only kind of friends, but it still seemed fitting. Come on in, Mitsuki, Masaru. Thanks for the invite, Inko. Mitsuki barged in, plopping her shoes off with ease. I can't wait to watch our sons beat the snot out of each other. It should be great. Still surprised that your little Izuku managed to get in. Katsuki's been steamed over that for months. Yes, she squeaked, standing to the side as the couple entered her home. It came as a surprise to both of us. I bought a vegetable tray, Masaru said softly, nodding in her direction as he took his time taking off his shoes. Are we the only ones coming? Oh, no, there's one more coming over. That would be me if I'm not mistaken. A leg stepped over the railing to her apartment. One of his legs was stretched all the way to the ground before retracting up rather quickly, and Izuku's Kendo-sensei appeared. His hair was tied back into a ponytail and was largely black with ever more streaks of gray darting across it. 𝐻𝗧𝗄 Kendo, pleased to meet your acquaintance. Or is it make your acquaintance? 𝐻𝗧𝗄 Kendo. Masaru's eyes went wide as he continued into the building. I've heard of that name before. You wouldn't happen to be a pro, would you? I'm retired now, but yes, I went by Hurricane Striker back then. 𝐻𝗧𝗄 hummed, easily taking off his straw slippers. He nodded at her and bowed slightly. Thank you for the invitation, Inko. I wasn't aware I was expected to bring food. Oh, no, you weren't. She scrambled backward, gesturing to the table where she had set up snacks. And please, don't worry about it. It's because of you that Izuku managed to get into UA in the first place, so we can both. You speak nonsense, Inko. He waved her off, his smile growing wide enough so that only a sliver of his blue eyes would be seen. I assure you, even without my help, Izuku would have made it into UA with his own determination. Now, please, let's watch our children do their best. In theory, watching the event with guests should calm her nerves. Yes, I'm eager to see how Itsuka and Izuku do. They're both going to lose to my Katsuki. Mitsuki shouted from the table, a chip covered in dip halfway into her mouth. Good dip, by the way. Between the obstacle course, the cavalry battle, and Katsuki's brief speech that had the whole world angry at him, she could barely keep her heart from racing. Then came the real panic. The tournament, 47th match. The big sis of Class 1B Itsuka Kendo versus the hardest head in Class 1I Jiro Kirishima. Was that really the name they were going with? Big sis, just because she was the class president, and they all listened to her and she cared about them, did not mean she was their big sis. Okay, maybe it did. But that was beside the point. She breathed, stepping out onto the stadium field, her gaze focused up to where her class was sitting. She really owed them a lot. Despite how much she protested, Tetsu and Yui had insisted that she be the one to participate in the tournament. They chose to put their hopes on her, to have her and 𝐈𝐵ARA to carry the banner of Class 1B. And then there were her own selfish desires for wanting to win. If she won, she'd tell Izuku how she felt. That's simple, and that meant smashing her way through each opponent. With so much on the line, she couldn't afford to lose. Don't expect me to go easy on you just because you're a girl. Jiro smiled, holding up his arms as they turned into hardened spikes. Really, people still say that? She lowered into her combat stance, both fists normal-sized. He had a quirk like Tetsu where he made himself really tough to damage. But it didn't look like his speed was hindered during the cavalry battle. It should be easy with the ring-out rule. How lame can you get? Right, sorry, guess that wasn't very manly. He laughed, shark-like teeth grinning at her as his red hair became even spikier. Let's have a good match, okay? Right. She offered him a single bow and remembered all of her father's training. It was good enough to help her get into the entrance exam, good enough to have her place in a tournament. Now it was time to see if it was good enough against other heroes. Start. He charged her, his body hard and spiky with a feral grin. His footfalls sounded like two bricks grinding against each other. Like most heroes, his style of fighting was punch and hope it hits. He was stronger than her, but she had experience on her side. She guided his strike inwards, across his chest, and slipped in behind him, grabbing onto the hand and forcing him into a grab. Huh. He screamed like he was the winner while struggling against her grip. Is that all you got? There's no way you'll be able to hurt me. Might as well just surrender. You talk too much. She enlarged her hands around him. Hey, wait, what's with your hands? He squirmed in her grip. It's my quirk, they grow. She lifted him off the ground, still holding him nice and tight. And your quirk just makes you harder, not heavier, so I can easily do this. She spun once and tossed him out of the ring. Well, that was easy. What an anticlimactic ending. On to the next round. 40 huh. Your girl's clever 𝐒𝐻𝐿. Mitsuki slapped her knees, eyes still glued to the TV. She knew exactly how to beat that red-headed kid and didn't hold back. 𝐒𝐻𝐿 nodded. Thanks for your kind words. I must admit I'm looking forward to the next match as well. Mostly to see who exactly his daughter would be facing off against. From what he had seen thus far, Katsuki might just be the most ferocious fighter of the whole lot. Still, it's a shame we haven't seen Izuku use his quirk just yet. Masura spoke, leaning back on the couch that he was sharing with his wife. But his next opponent is that ice kid, so he'll have to use it, right, Inko? Izuku's mother perked up, a cup of tea inches from her mouth. Oh, I'm just proud of how far he's already made it. What are you talking about, Inko? Mitsuki flexed one of her arms and placed a leg on the table, glaring at the other woman. Our kids are going to meet in the final round. Why else would they end up on opposite sides? You forget, Mitsuki. Your Katsuki still has to go through my Itsuka, but before that, he still has his first match to worry about. 𝐒𝐻𝐿 smiled, taking a sip of his tea. Things were certainly interesting. In a matter of minutes, the die was cast and Katsuki would be his daughter's next opponent. Now it was time to see what his daughter could do against someone with an overwhelming quirk like Katsuki. After, he watched young Izuku battle against the boy with ice powers. 12-minute battle. Chapter text. The whole stadium was shaking with excitement as the match progressed down below. Kaken was going all out against Itsuka, the smoke and dust clouds from his explosions nearly obscuring the field as the two dodged, fought, and scrapped for every possible advantage. Compared to Kaken's previous match, the tone was completely different. Izuku, 𝐒𝐫 called from behind him. The tall class president of Wano was all smiles as he walked out onto the balcony to stand beside him. I'm glad to see your surgery was a success. Right, thanks. He shrugged with his good shoulder, only able to take his eyes off the fight for a few seconds. His heart was pounding against his chest, perhaps even more so than his match against Shoto. But that was different. Even if he still ended up losing that match by just a few inches, it still felt good that maybe, just maybe, he had gotten through to him. He used his fire after all. Izuku looked back at 𝐒𝐫 once more, forcing a smile on his face. But it wasn't really much of a surgery, just a few broken fingers and a dislocated shoulder. Recovery girl said that after a bit of rest I'll be as good as new. It could have been much worse if he hadn't been training with Kendo sensei on how to control one for all. Only you could say that a few broken fingers isn't much of a surgery, but compared to the entrance exam I think you're making progress. 𝐒𝐫 pushed up his glasses, standing next to him on the railing. Thanks, he nodded, looking down at the field. I'm still nowhere near where I need to be, and that's what worries me. 𝐒𝐫 also looked towards the field. Compared to you, Shoto, and Katsuki, the rest of us don't really have quirks that stand out, let alone stand a chance. He sighed, hands tight around the metallic railing. You make it sound like we're invincible. He half laughed. One mistake against you and I'd be out. Maybe so, but that goes double for us. I go against you, I have one's chance to finish it. The same goes for Shoto and Katsuki as well. He nodded towards Itsuka, just looked at the field down there. Compared to the rest of us, her quirk is rather plain, uninspired, and simple. I know that she's your best friend, but I don't see how you shouldn't count her out. His good hand tightened into a fist. Without her quirk, she's the best fighter here, and a simple quirk can go a long way in being useful. She did rank 5th in the entrance exam after all. You have a lot of faith in her, don't you? 𝐒𝐫 asked, pushing off the railing. Yeah, when I thought I didn't have a quirk, she was one of the first people to believe in me. He found himself smiling at her. She's a great person, Yano. Kind, strong, smart, hard-working, beautiful. I owe her a lot, so I'm going to believe in her with everything I got. It almost sounds like you have a crush on her, Izuku. 𝐒𝐫 turned to leave. Try to keep the school code of conduct in mind. I'm going to go watch with the others before my match. Right, he nodded, taking a small breath. His face felt like he had stared into a bowl of boiling water for too long and was ready to burn up. Did he have a crush on her? Sure, they were best friends, and he was always happy to spend time with her, and they could constantly talk about nothing for hours, and she was beautiful and always there for him, but that didn't mean that he had a crush on her, did it? Itsuka's smile came to mind, the roughness of her hands, the firmness of her touch, the way she would react to him holding her hand, her reaction to him asking her out, the smile she would wear while dressing up. What would their first kiss feel like? He shook his head. No, that wouldn't happen. There was no way that Itsuka would be interested in him like that. Besides, he needed to be her friend right now. He needed to be her support. He took a deep breath, tumbling towards the railing once more. You can do it, Itsuka. 40. Her heart was pounding in her chest. Her stomach was roiling with unease and the back of her throat felt tight like she was ready to vomit up the well-balanced meal she had eaten hours ago. Worse, her hands were shaking. There was the nervousness of the fight, the eagerness for that fight, and the worriedness she had over Izuku as he recovered from his match with Shoto. She wished she could have been there with him to make sure that he was okay. But the teachers stopped her. They were right though. She needed to be ready for her fight. Once she beat that blonde-haired prick, then she could see how Izuku was. It was just more fuel for her fires. Beating Katsuki was personal on so many levels. The dude was a prick and she wanted to rip the stick out of his ass and beat him to death with it. Alright, on to the next match. Midnight's voice echoed through the hallway as she marched forward towards the stadium. Her previous opponent had been simple. He was slower than her, so even if he had a better quirk she could deal with him because of the rules. Against Katsuki, she was at a disadvantage in so many ways. The merciless madman from Class 1A, Katsuki Bakugo. The crowd erupted with mixed responses. Equals parts cheers and boos. It was to be expected from his previous matches and his general ability to make an ass out of himself. And the last hope of Class 1B, their class president and a girl that can't afford a decent manicure, Itsuka Kendo. Her eye twitched at that introduction. She almost preferred the big sis one. They were both bad. Seriously, merciless madman versus a girl with bad nails. What kind of a fight name was that? The crowd's cheers for her were less loud than Katsuki's but far less negative. It was to be expected after her short match against that hard guy from 1A. Somehow, she forgot his name already. She stood across from her, hands already balled into fists. On the plus side, she finally got to punch him in the face and not get in trouble for it. It was enough to put a smile on her face. Alright, Ginger, Katsuki popped his look, a cold determination in his eyes that matched the tone in his voice, that she had no chance, that his victory was already decided. Same offer I made, round face. This is your last chance because I won't hold back. She laughed, feeling her stomach settle as the anger boiled over. Oh, don't worry, if you want to give up all you'll have to do is kiss my shoes and I'll stop beating the crap out of you. He twitched, smile turning feral as he looked actually pissed off at her. I really hate mouthy bitches like you know. So, all this anger you have is because you hate yourself, right? She popped her shoulder, lowering herself down into a fighting stance, one that would give her reach instead of power. She'd seen him fly using his quirk, so just throwing him out of the ring wouldn't do her any good. Additionally, there was no way to know how much damage his explosions would do to her hands. Alright, enough squabbling like newlyweds. What? She half screeched, looking over to Midnight. Please tell her Izuku didn't hear that. Begin. She felt the air shake as Katsuki charged at her, his legs off the ground as the explosions from his hands pushed him towards her at frightening speeds. Her hands enlarged for the first blow, relying on size rather than speed to block his first attack. Pain burned through her right hand as she felt the shockwave travel up her arm. Just how powerful were his explosions? Damn it. She swung that hand towards him through the pain. She just needed to grab him, pin him down and force him to submit. To fucking slow. The explosions nearly wrung her ears deaf, yet somehow his own grating voice managed to be louder still. An explosion hit her on the shoulder, forcing the air from her lungs and her stumbling forward. She swatted backward with her other hand barely hitting him and forcing him back. If only for just a moment. Katsuki landed on his feet, one hand barely touching the ground before he charged at her again. He knew he was faster than her, and he was going to exploit that weakness all the way to victory. Damn it. He charged at her again, and she was still off balance. Her hands were barely able to block it in time. Blood fell to the stadium floor as she felt her hand burning. Damn it. Even if her hands were extra durable, there was still no way she could keep up with those explosions. You can do it, she heard Izuku's voice from around stadium. Her eyes scanned quickly looking for him even as Katsuki slammed into her again. She saw him, if only for a second. Itsuka. Izuku was cheering for her. Damn it. She blocked another explosion, lunging into it to try and grab Katsuki's arm. No dice. He only blasted her again, using the energy to push himself back and out of her reach. Not only were her hands too slow and clunky to get to him, but they also blocked her view. He was able to use the overwhelming offense of his quirk as a defense, and using brute force wouldn't work. She needed to use her brain and force him into making a mistake. With a breath, she shrunk her hands down to their normal size. You giving up? Katsuki goaded, a manic smile on his face. You wish. She smiled right back at him. She spaced her feet, lowered her center and held up her hands, blood dripping down her arm. It still stung. It stung a lot, but it was nothing she could deal with. Izuku managed his fight with a bunch of broken fingers after all. I'm just going to kick your ass without a quirk. That pissed him off even more. The explosions that powered his charge were larger and brighter. His open palm extended towards her, the air burning around it as the force shook her body. She stepped into it, forcing that first attack wide with her arm. His eyes went wide for half a second before her hand came in from below, slamming into his chin hard enough to knock his head back. She heard his teeth clacking. Leaping attacks were all about pure offense, but also so risky once caught off guard. And now it was her turn to counterattack. With the hand she used to deflect his attack, she struck, enlarging it just as she made contact with his stomach, and his other hand slammed into the right side, her face exploding on contact. The world spun as she found herself staring at the ground. Her ear was ringing, and all she could smell was burnt eggs. It took her a moment to gather where she was, and she saw Kitsuki, still in the ring on all fours, vomiting up something that mixed with some blood. He looked mad, same she couldn't hear him. She pressed her hands onto the ground barely to know which way was up, let alone push that way. She felt her heartbeat in her ears, causing the ringing to ebb and flow. Her eyes went towards Kitsuki again. He was already on one knee. She needed to stand up. Once she got a foot on the ground it was easier, and she was up, ready to fight again. Even if the world was slightly tilted, Kitsuki said something at her as he walked forward, but the ringing wouldn't let anything in. She held her fists up, extending one blood-covered hand outwards, waving him towards her. This time, he didn't charge. Instead, he walked towards her, hands sparking as he spat more blood out of his mouth. He threw his hand back like he was rolling a bowling ball and threw an explosion at her. The shockwave hit her dead center. She felt the world going black around her. Shit, 40 so. Mitsuki leaned back in the chair looking at him with a bit of shock in her eyes. Ooh, sorry about what my boy did to your girl's face. Hopefully, that doesn't scar. He just smiled, as the screen flashed to Kitsuki standing in victory as he spat more blood out of his mouth, before reaching in and pulling something out. Oh, don't worry, my girl is tough, and recovery girl will be able to cover those wounds easily. I don't know if she can cover missing teeth though. Mitsuki looked back at the screen before howling in laughter. Both of his students had been defeated, but he found pride in their fights easy enough, especially that of his daughters, though she might need a new haircut. 40 quit moving. He heard the stern, nearly quiet voice of Yui from beyond the nursing room. He had rushed over as soon as the teachers had let him. But it tickles. Itsuka's voice whined. And you're cutting so close. That's because you don't have a lot of hair on that side anymore. That might be the longest sentence he'd heard Yui speak. You're lucky this is in. Who cares? Kaken sneered from much closer, almost on the other side of the door. Your hair's always going to look shitty. Bite me. Itsuka responded quickly. Oh, wait, you can't. Bitch. The door slid open, and Kitsuki stood in the doorway, one cheek slightly puffier than the other. He glared at him for a second before sneering. Out of the way, Deku. I gotta go beat that half-naff bastard now, and your bitch of a girlfriend isn't helping. She's not. He was cut off with Kitsuki pushed away, heading towards the arena once more. Don't care, you're both annoying. He stomped off, hands in his pockets. He looked back into the room and saw laying in one of the beds he had been in early was Itsuka. She was flinching as Yui slowly snipped at the hair around the bandage of her right ear. It almost looked like she was shaved on that side. He had seen a few girls with one side shaven in movies and on the street, but with Itsuka it looked good. But that could just be because her usual ponytail was absent and her long orange hair was pushed to her left, almost covering her left eye. She looked at him and smiled. Her cheeks were rushed. Izuku, you're late. She waved at him with a bandaged hand and pointed at Yui, who growled. Yui was here first. Clearly she's my best friend. Yui paused her snipping to look at him. She's on some painkillers right now, and she still has a concussion. Yui blinked at resumed snipping at her. So she's a bit out of it. No, Itsuka drew out the O sound as she rolled her eyes. I'm not out of it. I just can't feel my hands right now. Oh, well, I wanted to come as soon as possible, but the teachers wouldn't let me until surgery was done. He walked over, taking the seat opposite of Yui. Sorry, it's okay. She waved another bandaged hand at him. It landed onto of his own hand-padded fingers, tracing his bandages. We both lost in the same round, which means I won't be able to tell you my secret. Your secret? What secret? He was at a loss. What secret could Itsuka have? She smiled at him wide enough to show off all her teeth. It was so weird seeing her with her hair down. But at the same time, she looked really, really pretty. Not telling. There, Yui interrupted, tossing the scissors to the side. You look less like your hair got burned in a fire. Thanks, Itsuka hummed, tossing her hair back over her shoulder and looking at him once again. Yep, he had a crush on her. A big crush. This was bad. How on earth was he going to stand in the same room as her without freaking out about it? His face felt hot. She leaned forward, placing both her hands over his, eyes focused only on him. Well, Izuku, what do you think of my haircut? His mouth went dry. What was he supposed to say to that? Did he tell her she always looked beautiful to him? That she was cute? That it suited her? That he really liked it mostly because it was attached to her? That somehow her hair color had become his favorite hair color in the history of ever? Well, I think it looks really good on you. He stuttered throughout that whole exchange, barely managing to speak through his blush. I like it a lot. Her smile grew and she bit her lip, humming like she was screaming on the inside. Thanks, I'm really happy you like it. Should I leave? Yui asked, pointing towards the door. Her face was plain save for the slightest hint of a smile. It looks like you two could use a room. No, Itsuka half flung herself at Yui. I need you to stay, for reasons.